The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76. The Captain's biggest fan. The person who rang the doorbell was, as expected, Carlson, whose hairline was in trouble. Shortly after the doorbell rang, Carlson came to the basement and wanted to talk to Tony. Sherlock didn't pay attention to what Carlson said to Tony, but he could probably guess what it was. It was nothing more than the Avengers or Tony providing technical support to S.H.I.E.L.D. The reason why Sherlock didn't pay attention to this fun thing right in front of him was very simple. That is, the unfinished Captain America shield in his hand. After all, this thing is too unscientific in Sherlock's opinion. Although Sherlock himself is an unscientific product, this unfinished Captain America shield looks like it is made of several layers of metal. Sherlock doesn't know which one of them is the legendary vibranium. It may be all of them, or only one layer is. But in either case, these layers of metal together are only about 5mm thick. Sherlock really can't imagine that a metal shield less than 5mm thick can defend against bullets, energy attacks, and even the impact of jumping from a height. The coolest thing is that this thing can be used as a frisbee to attack the enemy, and not just one enemy. In Captain America's hands, it bounces around like a pinball, and the key is that it can also bounce on people. Sherlock couldn't figure out how this thing's powerlessness could achieve these conditions. You know, the same thickness of car skin can't even block ordinary 9mm bullets. The scene of the police hiding behind the car door and shooting in the movie is actually that the police are tired of living, or the car door has been modified and bulletproof materials have been added. Just as Sherlock was holding this unfinished shield and was fascinated, and even began to think about whether to ask Tony to take this thing back to experiment to see what the physical properties of this thing are, Tony's voice sounded from next to Sherlock. "Okay, Mr. Carlson, I'm pleased and appreciate your actions in protecting Pepper, but this cannot be a reason for me to join your alliance to be a nanny." "Hey, Sherlock, stop looking at it. If you like it, I will give it to you later. Now, bring it over. The height of this thing should be just right." Tony called Sherlock to come over quickly and picked up the level that had just been placed on the pipe of the particle accelerator. Seeing Sherlock coming over with a shield, Tony glanced at Carlson standing aside with a little resentment and then reached out and held up the pipe of the particle accelerator. "Quick, quick, quick. Stuff it under the connection point. I can't hold on for long." Tony's face became like a boiled shrimp because of the force. Seeing Tony's fragile appearance, Sherlock dared not hesitate and stuffed the unfinished shield under the pipe. Seeing Sherlock had finished the placement work of the shield, Tony sent it directly. The pipe hit the shield with a crisp metal collision sound. Tony was holding his knees and breathing heavily. Seeing Tony's appearance, as if he was doing intense exercise, Sherlock couldn't help but pat his forehead and picked up a bottle of water from the cabinet next to him and threw it to Tony. "I say, why don't you make some engineering armor or something like that? With your current condition, I'm really afraid that you will kick your legs and die before the so-called new element is synthesized." Tony rolled his eyes unhappily after finally calming down from Sherlock's complaints. Although he had included Sherlock's suggestions in the next manufacturing plan of the iron armor, Tony, who was talking nonsense on the surface, didn't want to end like this. "Don't be ridiculous. I just didn't do warm-up exercises." After saying that, he didn't forget to put the level on the pipe again to take a look. I said the height of this thing is just right. It's perfect." Carlson stood aside and watched the uncle and nephew's operation, his mouth twitching all the time. Especially as a diehard fan of the captain, he felt so distressed when he saw the captain's shield placed under the pipe. After hesitating for a long time, Carlson couldn't help but speak directly. "Ahem, your shield should be a replica. Tony, I see that your pipe looks very heavy. Are you sure this replica can support the operation of this pipe?" After listening to Carlson's words, Tony looked at Carlson strangely and then answered Carlson perfunctorily while working. "It's not a replica. When my father made the shield for the captain, it was a spare part. It can be regarded as my father's relic. Why didn't your director tell you? As Tony said this, Coulson on the other side began to get excited gradually, looking at Sherlock and Tony, as if they were two antique dealers. No. What I mean is that if this thing is real, you should send it to the National Museum in Washington, instead of using it as a bridge for your pipeline. Before Coulson finished speaking, Sherlock couldn't help but twitch his mouth, and he stood in front of Coulson and raised his hand to interrupt Coulson. Coulson looked at Sherlock standing in front of him with his arm raised with some confusion. Before Coulson asked what Sherlock wanted to do, Sherlock turned his wrist and a postcard appeared in Sherlock's hand. Coulson thought Sherlock just wanted to perform a close-up magic trick for him and looked at the postcard in his hand with some confusion. After just one glance, Coulson said that he couldn't take his eyes away. As a diehard fan of the captain, Coulson would never make a mistake. The signature on the postcard was definitely the captain's signature. Coulson even dared to bet that the note-taking and phraseology he learned during his career as an agent would confirm that this was definitely the captain's autograph. The only thing that puzzled Coulson was the time. After all, judging from the time of this postcard in the notes, it must not be too long. At most, it was last week, and this was still counting the time when the postcard was produced. Captain's autographed postcard? Where did you get it from? Coulson grabbed the postcard from Sherlock's hand and looked at it repeatedly in surprise. Seeing Coulson's inexperienced look, Sherlock also scratched his head in confusion. After all, according to the movie, it should be Coulson who was in charge of the task of digging out the captain. Well, you don't know? Didn't Black Braised Egg tell you? Listening to Sherlock's question, especially the three words Black Braised Egg, Coulson couldn't help but think of Nick Fury sitting behind his desk with a serious face. The corners of his mouth twitched fiercely, and Coulson sorted out his thoughts. Well, should I know? And he is our director after all, Sherlock. Coulson was interrupted by Sherlock before he finished speaking. Well, let me tell you, your idol Captain America has been dug out of the glacier by your director, and he has woken up and is now undergoing rehabilitation training at my house. As soon as Sherlock finished speaking, Coulson on the other side began to roar. Son of BXXCH, the damn black salted egg didn't even tell me about this. Chapter 77 The Birth of a New Element. Seeing Coulson's double standards and incompetent rage, Sherlock said he was relieved, and even secretly took out his mobile phone and turned on the recording function for Coulson. Coulson was unaware of this, and was still incompetent and furious. He even wanted to go to Sherlock's house to meet his idol. As for why Sherlock had a signed photo of the captain in his hand, when he was obviously not a fan of the captain, it actually started when Tony and Sherlock built a particle accelerator. After completing the operations such as drilling holes, Sherlock suddenly remembered that there were still many gifts in his library that he had not given away, so he drove back to his home in a hurry. But when he got home, he found that his bedroom was occupied, and he lost his right to live in his own home. The person who occupied Sherlock's bedroom was the captain who was trained by Sherlock. Fortunately, the captain was still quite particular and did not occupy Sherlock's bed. Instead, he bought a small camp bed and made a bed on the floor in Sherlock's bedroom. Despite this, the captain was still very embarrassed about living in Sherlock's bedroom. He kept apologizing to Sherlock and even said that if Sherlock minded, he would find a way to rent one. Seeing the captain's honest appearance, and the two little girls in Sherlock's family also liked the captain very much, and the captain was like an old grandfather who took care of the two little girls all the time, Sherlock just let it go. After all, if nothing unexpected happened recently, he would be a toolman for Tony, and he probably had little time to come back, so he didn't have any objections to this. However, in his character of not wanting to suffer a loss, Sherlock still made more than 40 postcards for the captain, and asked the captain to help sign. The captain, out of shame, naturally agreed and fulfilled Sherlock's little wish. You know, in the lighthouse country, plus the captain's huge fan base, sometimes the captain's signature is sometimes better than cash. After all, the captain can be said to be the first superhero officially promoted by the government of the great lighthouse country. In that era, from 80 to 3 years old, no one had not heard of the captain's name. Even now, the image of Captain America often appears in various toys, comics, and movies. It is no exaggeration to say that, as long as S.H.I.E.L.D. is willing to announce that Captain America has returned, and Captain America is willing, Sherlock can even guarantee that Captain America can debut on the spot, and his debut is a peak, standing directly at the top of Hollywood, and becoming a household name and the most profitable star. Of course, necessary complaints are still indispensable. When giving Price a gift, Sherlock also complained about his experience of losing his bedroom, and wanted Price to buy a piece of land behind the training ground, to build a dormitory or something. Regarding Sherlock's proposal, Price said that, when you remember the day Lily, it will be cold. It has been done, and will be ready to start work soon. At that time, the entire training ground will become a real closed training base. Sherlock could only scratch the back of his head embarrassedly. Back to the present. After a while, Coulson gradually calmed down. When he looked up, he saw Sherlock holding a mobile phone. He couldn't help but twitching his mouth. At that moment, he didn't want to stay any longer, and directly said goodbye to Sherlock and Tony. Tony was so absorbed in his new element that he had no time to pay attention to Coulson. Even when Coulson and Sherlock were talking about Captain America, Tony didn't pay attention to them. He was busy with his own work. Seeing this, Sherlock could only take Tony's place as half the master to see Coulson off. The two of them were discussing some gossip about Captain America along the way. Although Sherlock had not been in contact with the captain for a long time, he also talked to Coulson, the #1 fan of Captain America, about what he knew. Coulson was also very satisfied with this. After all, he had to perform some other tasks, and didn't have time to really go to Sherlock's house to see Captain America. After sending Coulson out, Sherlock watched Coulson walk towards his grandpa's car that was so modified that even his mother didn't recognize it, and then turned around to close the door of the villa. Just when Sherlock was about to close the door, Coulson stopped Sherlock. Sherlock turned around and looked at Coulson in confusion. Coulson patted his chest pocket, and a sound similar to a metal pot came out of his pocket. Just when Sherlock was wondering what Coulson meant, Coulson spoke. "Thank you for your potion. I tried it, and it's really useful. Thank you, Sherlock." Hearing Coulson's thanks, Sherlock also smiled friendly. To be honest, Sherlock had a good impression of the village chief of the novice village in the Marvel world. Be sure to keep the potion in your hand. It can save lives at a critical moment. After Sherlock's instructions, the two said hello and Coulson got in the car and left. Watching Coulson drive away in his old car, and listening to the sound of the old car, Sherlock twitched his mouth again. Sure enough, the old car was probably modified by Coulson and only the car shell was original. Just when Sherlock just closed the door of the villa, and was about to go back, the lights of the whole villa dimmed in an instant, and the next second, the whole villa began to tremble slightly. Along with this, there was a strong sound of electric current. Sherlock could tell with his heels that the anxious Tony had already started the circular particle accelerator. He didn't want to continue to waste time, so he turned around and started running towards the basement. When Sherlock arrived, the so-called new element had been created. At this time, Tony was holding a small triangular metal emitting blue and white light with tweezers, and was fascinated by it. Looking at Tony's obsessed look, and then looking at the villa that had been cut out by the particle beam, Sherlock couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Tony, who was obsessed with the new element, saw Sherlock standing at the door of the basement, and couldn't help but wave to Sherlock excitedly, showing the new element in his hand. After seeing Tony's look, Sherlock said, "I understand the reason, but why don't you put the container with the triangular metal closer to your refraction prism? Or even if it's not closer, it's a little off, so that it can hit the container at the moment of refraction. Why do you have to cut such a big scratch?" Chapter 78 Provocation from the enemy. Tony's movements were still very fast. Not long after the new element was synthesized, the new reactor was completed in Tony's hands. Compared with the old round reactor that looked like a light bulb, Tony's new reactor looked much more sci-fi. At least Sherlock thought so. Of course, Tony was Tony, and he trusted himself as always, and was as reckless as ever. When the new reactor was lit, Tony installed it on his chest himself. He even didn't forget to complain about the smell of the new reactor. In response, Sherlock said that he was speechless, and opened the door to Speechless. He was speechless. This thing actually had a smell. It was amazing. After completing the manufacture of the reactor, of course the next step was to make a new armor. Although Tony smashed his villa into a mess, the most critical part was not moved at all. Of course, it was only a matter of time to make a new armor. Seeing that Tony began to design his new armor, Sherlock's little ideas in his heart kept popping up, and he couldn't even control it for a while. After all, no boy can refuse a thing like the Iron Man armor, and Sherlock is no exception. Although he is a magician, this does not prevent Sherlock from wanting to collect one. Originally, Sherlock would not say these words. After all, there were too many people peeping at Tony's armor at that time, and Tony could not give it to him, even if he wanted to. But now it is different. Tony's armor has been updated for several generations, and each generation can even beat the previous generation of armor. In addition, Tony has just given one to his friend Rhodes, so Sherlock thinks he can also ask Tony for one for collection. In fact, when Sherlock talked about this with Tony, Tony agreed without hesitation. After all, his nephew's magic is amazing. To put it bluntly, as long as Sherlock wants, he can completely control Tony. Therefore, when Sherlock said that he wanted to collect a piece of armor, Tony did not hesitate. Others might want to take it back to study and do something, but Sherlock might really collect it. Seeing Tony agreed, Sherlock could no longer hold back his restless heart and shouted excitedly, saying that he would go get his own design. Sherlock's exclamation surprised Tony. This brat actually had a design. A magic student could actually design a battle armor? At this moment, Tony, who was waiting for the battle armor to be manufactured, said that he was so curious that he exploded. Sherlock naturally did not hesitate and quickly ran to his car, took back the two models on the dashboard and threw them to Tony, and said that he only needed the appearance and he didn't need any other functions. The only thing he needed might be to ask Tony to build a female artificial intelligence into one of them. Hearing Sherlock's strange request, Tony opened his hand with a question in his head. It would be fine if he didn't look at Sherlock's so-called design. As soon as he saw it, Tony felt his blood pressure rise all of a sudden. What the hell is this design? Isn't this just a pure handmade model? And Tony really knew both figures. One was a 2B girl. Tony was dragged by Sherlock to play with her for a while. The other was the famous Mobile Suit Gundam. Although Tony had not read the original comics, he knew this world-renowned hype. Looking at the two things in his hand, which were called design drawings, but were actually written as figures, Tony said that, even if he was stupid, he knew what Sherlock wanted. It was probably fake, to want his own steel armor for collection. It was real to want a living 2B sister and a wearable Mobile Suit Gundam toy. The more Tony thought about it, the higher his blood pressure became. He threw the figure in his hand to Sherlock in a bad mood, and said 3 words to Sherlock with a fake smile. I can't do it. Looking at Tony's look of whatever you want, I'm powerless. Sherlock was also very angry. It's okay if the 2B girl can't do it. He can make his own steel armor. Is it difficult for him to have a wearable Gundam? Besides, I didn't ask for anything. I just asked for a good look. Is it that difficult? Sherlock was no longer polite and began to mock Tony with full energy. His sharp language was basically equivalent to that of a thin dog. You can't do this. Tony was so angry that he was furious. He stood up and prepared to have a life and death duel with Sherlock, the rebellious nephew. Just as the uncle and nephew were talking and arguing with each other, Tony's phone rang very abruptly. Hearing the phone ringing, Tony and Sherlock temporarily stopped fighting and decided to answer the phone before talking. Jarvis was very considerate and answered the phone directly through the speaker. There was a man's voice on the phone, and he began to threaten Tony with a strong Russian accent. He said that he would return the persecution of his family by Tony's family for nearly 40 years to Tony within 40 minutes. After that, he hung up the phone directly without giving Tony any chance to react. Tony didn't care about playing with Sherlock anymore and started to open the computer to check what would happen in the next 40 minutes. In just a few minutes, Tony locked onto an exhibition. As expected, Hammer's company and Pepper would participate in this largest exhibition on the East Coast. Tony, who had determined the source, immediately urged Jarvis to speed up the manufacture of the armor and asked Sherlock to watch Pepper first. Sherlock pouted and agreed to Tony's request, although Sherlock thought that Ivan Vanko didn't need to make Tony so nervous. After all, in the movie, Tony's operation could be said to be very easy. However, for precaution, Sherlock still agreed to Tony's request. After all, Pepper was still good to him, and even when Tony was still a playboy, she was already a qualified aunt. After making a phone call with Pepper in front of Tony to confirm her location, Sherlock opened a portal and walked in, leaving Tony alone in the villa waiting for the armor to be manufactured. As for where Sherlock's portal was, Sherlock said it would not be opened directly next to Pepper. Sherlock's first stop was next to a snack shop. After buying 2 large buckets of popcorn and drinks and snacks from the snack shop without any communication, Sherlock opened the portal again and went to Pepper's side. What? Why did Sherlock buy snacks and popcorn? Nonsense. Of course it was to watch the fun. The Iron Man Wars. The live version. If I don't hold the popcorn and watch it carefully, wouldn't it be no different from missing out on 5 million? Chapter 79. Front Row Eating Watermelon. Part 1. This so-called weapons expo is not just about weapons, just like the ZH Air Show is not just about airplanes. Coupled with the fact that the gun ownership rate of the lighthouse country leads the world, the entire weapons expo is crowded with people, and there are all kinds of people who want to buy anything. Things that can be linked to weapons are sold, and things that cannot be linked to weapons are also sold. In addition to the dazzling array of weapons, there are also all kinds of snacks stalls, densely packed along the streets on both sides of the road of the expo, but the price is the same all over the world. As for what Sherlock is doing now, look, there is a person in the crowd carrying a high-end AR-15 rifle that he just bought, a bucket of popcorn on his arm, a plastic bag hanging on his hand, and the plastic bag contains the melon seeds that Sherlock bought before he came. He is also holding a large cup of drink in his hand. He is the one who squeezed in the crowd. Sherlock looked around the crowded weapons expo while constantly buying some of his favorite gadgets. That's how the AR-15 on his back came. If you don't know Sherlock's identity, this is completely the look of melon-eating crowd, without exception. As for why Sherlock is so relaxed, we have to thank Hammer, this funny guy. As we all know, Stark Industries had withdrawn from the weapons manufacturing industry before Sherlock's good uncle Tony became Iron Man. As the largest arms chief in the United States, withdrawing from the arms industry, the gap left is undoubtedly very huge. Faced with such a big gap, Hammer Industries, which has always been the second in command, continued to exert its strength and actually took over the gap left by Stark Industries, although Hammer did not eat all the gaps left by Stark Industries. But just a small part of it is enough for Hammer, the second in command for thousands of years, to become the real boss in the field of arms. Therefore, Hammer, who has been suppressed by Tony for many years, is so happy that he is almost shoulder to shoulder with the sun. People, this happiness is easy to float, watching Tony become Iron Man, punishing evil and promoting good everywhere, and snatching the light of the arms giant that should have belonged to him. Hammer, this funny guy, was so jealous that he couldn't help it. In addition, Hammer Industries also brought their own steel soldiers this time, which could definitely suppress Stark. Therefore, Hammer Industries, which was supposed to be the highlight of the new product launch at the Weapons Expo, contacted the organizer and changed its launch to be before Stark Industries. You know, because Stark Industries gave up arms manufacturing, the launch quota was very late, and the later the site of such an expo, the fewer people there were. In order to humiliate Stark Industries, Hammer, this funny guy, put himself in the time period with the least people. No wonder Hammer Industries can only be the second place for a long time. Sherlock walked around the exhibition for a long time, and then he felt that it was about time. He picked up his mobile phone and called his future Aunt Pepper. As expected, Pepper was now in the backstage of the launch stage in the center. After learning that Sherlock had arrived, Pepper was extremely happy and said that Sherlock should come directly to the backstage and she would contact someone to pick up Sherlock. Sherlock naturally had no objection, but the staff member who came to pick up Sherlock was very familiar to Sherlock. It was our famous Black Widow, Agent Natasha Romanoff. Seeing Black Widow in a professional suit walking towards him, Sherlock felt that his eyes were about to pop out. Black Widow? Why are you here? Haven't you been fired by Tony? Sherlock's words successfully made Black Widow a little confused. Both the content and the address were areas that Black Widow had never thought of. After a while, Black Widow finally reacted and rolled her eyes helplessly, but she also answered Sherlock's question. First of all, you can call me Natasha, not Black Widow. Secondly, I don't want to come either. This should have been Carlson's job, but I don't know what's wrong with him. After calling the director, he actually took a vacation. So I was forced to work overtime. Sherlock followed Black Widow, cracking melon seeds, while listening to Black Widow complaining about work like an ordinary person. But unfortunately, Sherlock didn't believe a word of Black Widow's words and just watched it for fun. After all, she is the famous Black Widow, and Sherlock dared not show too much in front of her. Being a funny person is Sherlock's most effective counterattack. Black Widow led the way and complained, but as they were about to reach the destination, Sherlock was dealing with it one sentence at a time, and even didn't stop eating the melon seeds in his mouth. The three very rhythmic sounds of cracking melon seeds were like accompaniment to Black Widow's complaints. TSK, a difficult kid. This was the only thought in Black Widow's heart, after she failed to approach Sherlock again. Seeing that Black Widow stopped before entering the backstage, she turned around and looked at Sherlock, who was eating melons with a serious face, as if the person who just complained about work did not exist. What's wrong, Black Widow? Why don't you leave? Sherlock still looked at Black Widow eagerly like a curious baby, and Black Widow's mouth twitched all the time. After a while, Black Widow barely suppressed her desire to fight Sherlock here and now, and said with gritted teeth, "FXXK, damn. Don't call me Black Widow. Okay Black Widow, I know Black Widow, if there's nothing else, I'll go find my future aunt first." Black Widow. After Sherlock finished speaking, he pushed open the door to the backstage without any hesitation, leaving Black Widow standing alone in the wind. At this time, Black Widow had only one idea in her mind. Screw the task, whoever wants to do the task of approaching Sherlock can do it, and if Black Braised Egg doesn't agree, I'll resign on the spot. Sherlock, who walked into the door, breathed a sigh of relief and sighed deeply. As expected, Black Widow was naturally dastardly and treacherous. Sincerity was always her ultimate skill. As long as she pretended well enough, Black Widow would never get what she wanted from her. Although Sherlock didn't know what these people were going to do, he always felt that they were not holding back anything good. After all, what good could S.H.I.E.L.D. have? Sherlock didn't know why Black Widow kept approaching him again and again. Since the time in the donut shop, Black Widow would change her method every time she approached him. But there was no doubt that no matter which method she used, Black Widow must have some purpose in approaching him. No matter what the purpose was, Sherlock didn't want them to succeed, especially before Captain America destroyed S.H.I.E.L.D. Chapter 80, Front Row Eating Watermelon, Part 2. Sherlock, you're finally here. As soon as Sherlock walked into the backstage, he was spotted by Pepper Potts. She was very surprised and ran to Sherlock and wanted to give him a big hug. But obviously, the popcorn in Sherlock's arms, the melon seed bag hanging on his fingers, and the drink in his hand, stopped Pepper Potts' action. Despite this, Pepper Potts was still very happy that Sherlock could come to accompany her. Also running behind Pepper Potts was Hammer, the funny guy. Seeing Pepper Potts coming to a strange man, Hammer hurried over. Looking at the familiar two people, Hammer had a fake smile on his face. "Oh, my dear Miss Virginia Pepper Potts. Who is this? Don't you introduce her?" Hammer said to Pepper Potts with a fake smile and a sarcastic tone like an aria, as if he had become the unique god in the arms industry at this time, and laughed wildly at Stark Enterprises, which had lost the arms sector. At this time, Pepper Potts was facing away from Hammer. Sherlock clearly saw his future aunt roll her eyes helplessly, then she put on a fake smile and turned to deal with Hammer. After all, during Sherlock's visit to the exhibition, Pepper Potts had dealt with Hammer's sarcasm almost 7 times, 5 attempts to poach employees, 3 naked taunts, and 1 unfinished sexual harassment. And facing Hammer's sarcasm, can Sherlock, who loves fun, endure it? That must be impossible. Only Sherlock can seduce others. When will it be someone else's turn to seduce Sherlock? Therefore, before Pepper Potts could fight back against Hammer, Sherlock took the lead and stood up. "Ah, Cassipoo, you must be the Hammer of the so-called Hammer Industries. Casapoo, I've heard my Uncle Tony talk about you. Casapoo, oh, let me introduce myself. My name is Sherlock Casapoo, Tony's nephew Casapoo. I see it's your turn soon. Casapoo, why don't you go? Are you ready? Pa, this damn melon seed shell. Sherlock was like a street urchin. When chatting with Hammer, the melon seeds in his mouth never stopped, and he even spit the melon seed shells in the direction of Hammer in an extremely uncivilized way. Especially the last few spitting sounds, almost spitting the melon seed shells on Hammer's shoes that were polished to a reflective finish. Sherlock gave Hammer the feeling that he looked down on him from head to toe, and even the damn nuts that always made a clicking sound made Hammer feel that there was nothing wrong with Sherlock's content, and the mockery attribute of his words was full. Hammer's face turned black immediately, staring at Sherlock and Pepper next to Sherlock. Hammer, who had been pretending to be a gentleman all night, had no intention of pretending anymore. You will regret it. After tonight, Stark Industries will only tremble in the shadow of Hammer Industries. After saying that, Hammer turned and left. Hammer made his height of just over 1.7 meters seem to be 2 meters taller. Pepper was still a little worried. The reason why she could tolerate Hammer was that she didn't want Stark Industries to really confront Hammer Industries, but Sherlock's behavior just now undoubtedly made her efforts all night disappear, although Pepper had to admit that Sherlock was very happy. Seeing that Pepper seemed a little worried, Sherlock just smiled at Pepper and simply explained to her why he was here. For her, all this seemed like a dream, especially when Pepper knew that Tony was almost dead. She was even more surprised and even felt a little guilty in her heart, thinking that she seemed to care less about Tony. However, after Pepper learned about the extreme operations of Hammer Industries and the threats from Tony's opponent Ivan Vanko, Pepper's eyes widened. Especially when Pepper learned that Tony was sure that Ivan Vanko would definitely cause trouble at this expo, and it was most likely to be at Hammer's place. Pepper relaxed all of a sudden. Because Sherlock was by her side, Pepper was not worried about whether she was in any danger. After all, others might not know the power of Sherlock's magic, but Pepper knew it. The only thing was that, if Sherlock was determined to take Pepper away, no one present could stop them. Pepper, who was relieved, took the popcorn from Sherlock's arms and started eating while watching Hammer preparing to go on stage. Because she knew that there might be trouble later, Pepper even gave up her preparations for the press conference and dragged Sherlock to the vicinity of the exit to see what Hammer had done. The two looked like they were eating melons in the front row, which made Black Widow and the driver happy who was peeking at Black Widow feel helpless. Just as Sherlock expected, not long after Hammer's performance began, and before he could even tell much, Tony drove his new armor down from the sky. Then the very old-fashioned villain controlled his friends and the drones to chase Tony, and the crowd began to flee in panic when they saw that something was wrong. Sherlock and Pepper were not panicked at all. One of them was eating melon seeds and the other was eating popcorn, and they even had the mind to comment on Tony's battle. Unlike the two people eating melons, Black Widow felt something was wrong as soon as the incident happened and rushed to the control console of Hammer Enterprises in the background without any hesitation. As expected, Hammer was also roaring at the console at this time, but it was of no avail. Ivan Vanko controlled all the armors at the terminal, and Hammer had no control authority at all. In desperation, Black Widow could only bring out the essence of the name of Black Widow, and with just 2 moves, she interrogated Hammer, where he hid Ivan Vanko. After getting the exact information, Black Widow ran back to Sherlock and Pepper Potts to borrow a car. Pepper Potts agreed to Black Widow's request, and even asked Happy to help. After being visibly happy, Happy began to worry about Pepper Potts' safety, and was finally sent away by Pepper Potts. After all, Sherlock was here, and nothing could go wrong for her. As Stark's driver and part-time bodyguard, Happy also knew that Sherlock had received military training. After hesitating for a moment, he grinned and pulled Black Widow away. The moment the two left, Sherlock pulled out his wand and made 2 chairs on the edge of the stage. Pepper Potts and Sherlock each took one and began to watch the Iron Man vs. Iron Man live. Chapter 81. This matter is over. As it turns out, although Sherlock missed the famous scene where Happy beat one and Black Widow beat the whole team, the battle between the Iron Men can completely make up for the regret of not seeing the famous scene. Compared with the action movie on Black Widow's side, Sherlock's side can be called a science fiction movie, with explosion special effects, flying stunts, and the touching brotherhood and a hatred between the two families for half a century. All the element can be said to be full. The only regret may be that because of Pepper, Sherlock can't watch Tony's battle up close. Although watching from a distance also made Tony angry enough, he fought to death here, and in the end he had to drag his good brother Odd to deal with Ivan Vanko, a big pit. On Sherlock's side, he was cracking melon seeds and eating popcorn, watching the excitement. To be honest, if I really couldn't do anything, I would definitely rush up to give Sherlock a big fight to wake him up. I asked him to help protect Pepper, not to ask him to take Pepper, to become a fun person, and stand in the front row to eat melons. Of course, Tony only dared to complain in his heart, and he didn't even dare to say it out loud. After all, compared to helping him deal with Ivan Vanko, Tony still hoped that Sherlock could protect Pepper. Everything was perfect as planned. Before Hammer's mechas exploded, Sherlock opened a portal to the roof of a tall building, and then sent the coordinates to Tony. After dealing with Ivan Vanko, Tony pulled the war machine to the roof. The only imperfection was that Sherlock and Rod were fed a mouthful of dog food, and Pepper also took a big step towards Sherlock's aunt. Obviously one is a playboy and the other is an out-and-out strong woman, but now the two of them act like green hands who are in love for the first time. How could Rod and Sherlock let these two go in such a situation? One said it was like two seals kissing, and the other said it was a flower stuck in cow dung. Because of what happened tonight, Hammer's idea of stepping on Stark Industries to get to the top was also gone. Even whether Hammer Industries can continue to exist is a big problem. After all, he still has to face a lot of huge compensation. Of course, all this has nothing to do with Sherlock. That night, after confirming their relationship for the first time, Pepper and Tony took Rod and Sherlock to have a midnight snack and then drove them away without mercy. Sherlock was so angry that he scolded Tony for being a scumbag. If he was useful, he would be Zhao Xianshan, and if he was useless, he would be Mrs. Niu. Although he scolded him happily, Sherlock did not disturb Tony and Pepper's celebration after they were reborn. He quietly found an unmanned corner and opened a portal to return to Tony's villa and drove his own car back to his gun shop. Surprisingly, when Sherlock returned to his room, he found that Captain America had finished training and left his gun shop and even left a thank you letter in the room. Sherlock was a little happy about this. He threw his clothes away and got into the bed to prepare for a good sleep. The days that followed made Sherlock feel quite bored, and the reason was very simple. Nothing happened. It was like the calm before the storm. For a whole week, not to mention the lighthouse country, even the whole world was calm, and nothing major happened. Similarly, Sherlock was not the only one who felt that the world was too calm, but also our media friends. Look, the unlucky Hammer has been on the front page for almost a week. The media was so bored that they even found out what color pants Hammer's grandmother liked. Sherlock had no interest in this, but as a pure fun person, Sherlock deeply implemented the spirit of fun people having fun when they have fun, and creating fun when there is no fun, and began to toss his family. In particular, the Talalita were the top priority for Sherlock to find fun. At first, Mindy, as Hit Girl, was a little bit reluctant, but after learning about Sherlock's magical magic, this little Lalita has reached the point where she would pull out a grenade if she didn't agree with him. Thanks to Sherlock and the two little girls' fancy death, even in a calm world like a lake, the entire gun shop still maintains a very high level of liveliness. But you have to know that any parent in the world has a special emotion, that is, they like you in the first few days after you leave home for a long time. Even if it is a little noisy, they will feel that it is lively and a sign of prosperity. But as time goes by, the elder's goodwill will gradually decline, and it won't take long, just about a week, the elders at home will feel that you stay at home every day and you will feel uncomfortable. In short, once this time comes, no matter what you do, it is wrong. Sherlock is experiencing this kind of thing, and Price and others' attitude towards Sherlock is very similar to the way everyone here looks when they go home during the winter and summer vacations in college. From watching Sherlock and the two little girls making noises with a smile at the beginning, to looking at Sherlock with dislike, even if Sherlock didn't make noises later, and even to the point where he felt tired when he saw Sherlock's heartless appearance. In desperation, Price decided to find some work for Sherlock, just as a summer job. Sherlock was very happy about this. After all, it was boring at home, and Sherlock could feel that, if he continued to stay at home, what Price would do to him Sherlock didn't know. But those two little girls would definitely want to kill him. Sherlock had found more than once that Mindy had been watching the RPG that Sherlock hung on the gun store. Therefore, Sherlock didn't reject Price's so-called summer job, and just took it as a fun thing. But Sherlock never thought that Price's so-called summer job would be a world away from his understanding of summer job. Until Sherlock sat in the passenger seat of John Wick's Mustang, Sherlock didn't react to what he was going to do. He thought that Price asked John Wick to give him a ride. It wasn't until John Wick and Sherlock stopped at the door of the Continental Hotel that Sherlock realized what Price's so-called summer job was. My summer job is to serve dishes, burn stoves, and clean tables. My summer job is to wipe necks, chase cars, and kick people in the hips, right? Sherlock said. I don't understand, but I was shocked. Looking at Sherlock standing at the door of the hotel with a Spartan expression, John Wick patted his forehead helplessly and experienced the hardship of raising children for the first time in his life. However, as a good friend of Sherlock, and having accepted Price's commission, John Wick still had to do what he should do. He didn't care about the name or not, and walked to Sherlock and pulled Sherlock into the Continental Hotel. After all, as a rookie, Sherlock still had a lot to learn. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 80 To a Wonderful Misunderstanding. Although Sherlock looked confused on the surface, he was actually not opposed to the Continental Hotel and becoming a killer. Before crossing, Sherlock was a social animal, and he could only survive in the so-called company and make a living by suppressing his fun-loving nature. Since he achieved financial freedom and power after crossing, Sherlock has liberated his fun-loving nature and is full of curiosity about anything he has not been exposed to before crossing. Especially after meeting John Wick, Sherlock was so curious about the mysterious Continental Hotel in the movie before crossing that he exploded. Although Sherlock's gun shop is not a good thing. As for why John Wick agreed to bring Sherlock to the Continental Hotel, we have to talk about that wonderful misunderstanding. As we all know, Sherlock is lawless in his gun shop, which gives Price a headache. Therefore, Price tried every means to get Sherlock away. But when contacting John Wick, Price really didn't think so much, just hoping that John Wick would take Sherlock to broaden his horizons for Sherlock and himself. Price's original intention was to hope that John Wick would agree to take Sherlock with him when he was on a mission, so that Sherlock could see and gain some experience. But assassins are a profession that pays great attention to the master-disciple relationship. In simple terms, after graduating from Sherlock's training camp, ordinary gang mercenaries may just work directly, and if they are lucky, they can even become a small leader. But assassins are different. There are many rules within assassins, and only the most primitive master-disciple relationship can allow these newly graduated rookies to learn these rules. Moreover, the graduates of Sherlock's training camp only teach the basics. There are also professional advanced classes, but the price is naturally rising. Generally speaking, few newcomers or forces are willing to pay for the tuition fees of advanced classes for newcomers. Based on these various rules in the assassin industry, when John Wick heard that Price hoped that he could take Sherlock with him, he almost subconsciously thought of the master-disciple relationship rules in the assassin industry. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, John Wick finally agreed to Price's request. On the other hand, Price looked at John Wick, who had been thinking for a long time and didn't think so much. He could only lament that his child's noisy nature might have been known to everyone, so that no one was willing to agree to find a babysitter now. It is estimated that, if it were not for the fact that both he and Sherlock had a friendship with this famous legendary killer, he would probably not agree to take Sherlock with him. As for Sherlock, neither of them had the idea of informing Sherlock. After all, Sherlock, as a fun person, would not care about these things at all, so he could only agree happily. In this way, under the situation, where everyone understood the mistake, a dramatic and wonderful misunderstanding was born. There was also a scene where John Wick drove Sherlock to the door of the Continental Hotel. Of course, Sherlock himself was not opposed to such things. Just like a curious cat, Sherlock stared at the operation of John Wick who was pulling him, and saw John Wick and Sherlock walk to the door of the Continental Hotel, and knocked on the door. Just like in the movie, the door did not open directly, but a small window on the door opened. The window was small and only revealed a pair of eyes. John Wick, codename Night Stalker, the owner of the eyes behind the door, said John Wick's identity the moment he saw him. He also saw Sherlock behind John Wick. You know, as the doorman of the Continental Hotel, he would remember all the known killers in the area, but it was obvious that Sherlock was not among them. Tell me what you want. John Wick, the eyes behind the door, looked at Sherlock standing behind John Wick with a curious face, and asked calmly without any emotion. John Wick seemed to have expected the doorman's words. He waved his hand helplessly and took out 2 gold coins from the Continental Hotel from his arms and stuffed them into the coin slot under the small window. Newcomer, this is a fee. Sherlock clearly noticed that after John Wick said this, the eyes behind the door were obviously surprised for a moment, and then a strong curious look fell on him. Although Sherlock knew that John Wick was a living legend in this industry, when he watched a movie in his previous life, it was enough for Sherlock to re-examine what a living legend is now. However, what Sherlock did not expect was that the eyes behind the door were so curious that they even looked at him strangely without asking any more questions. After John Wick put 2 gold coins into the coin slot, the small window that could only show his eyes slowly closed. The next second, the door of the Continental Hotel slowly opened in front of Sherlock. What caught Sherlock's eyes was a whole set of very sophisticated decorations. It was the first time that Sherlock saw what a movie feeling was in reality. That's right, it was the feeling of watching a movie. The decoration of the entire Continental Hotel was actually exactly the same as that shot in the movie. It was really exactly the same, without any difference. With a faint smoke and some European-style decoration, the entire hotel lobby gave Sherlock the feeling of a high-end club. Especially after Sherlock walked into the hotel, this feeling was even stronger. As far as Sherlock could see, all the people were dressed in formal clothes. Even the waiters were dressed in formal clothes. As the door closed behind Sherlock, the environment and people in the Continental Hotel gave Sherlock the feeling that it was like an ancient European high-end aristocratic club. Looking at his sportswear, Sherlock even wanted to take out his wand and destroy the place to avoid his social death. The damn price didn't say it earlier. Even his own armor would fit the atmosphere here better than the sportswear he was wearing now. Sherlock was beginning to regret doing what Price did. He really found him an ordinary and interesting summer job, and he even wore sportswear for the convenience of work. Sherlock, wearing a sportswear, followed John Wick and felt that the eyes of the entire hotel were on him at this moment. That feeling even made Sherlock feel what social death was. Chapter 83: The Continental Hotel and Sherlock's codename. In fact, Sherlock's feeling was not wrong, and it could even be said to be extremely accurate. The eyes of the people in the entire hotel lobby fell on Sherlock. Although they did not stare at Sherlock directly, their attention was indeed on Sherlock. Everyone wanted to know who this guy brought by John Wick was, and what was so special about him that could make the famous Night Demon, a living legendary killer, personally lead him into the industry. But it was obvious that Sherlock also misunderstood and thought that this group of people focused on him because of the clothes. Fortunately, John Wick's pace was very fast, and he soon led Sherlock to the front desk of the hotel. Standing at the front desk was a black man who looked very gentlemanly. Wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, the velvet suit on his body was meticulous, with all kinds of small details complete, and even the expression on his face well interpreted what was called gentle and elegant. Sherlock even dared to swear that even his Uncle Tony, the richest man, did not have a suit as sophisticated as the black man standing at the front desk. Seeing John Wick leading Sherlock to the front desk, the black man gave people a feeling of spring breeze as soon as he spoke. "Good morning, John Wick. How can I help you? John Wick showed a very familiar feeling to the black receptionist. Without saying much, he took out 4 gold coins and put them on the front desk and said to the black receptionist, "New registration." After John Wick said these words, the black man did not immediately take the gold coins on the front desk, but instead shifted his attention to Sherlock. He said to Sherlock very gentlemanly, "The Continental Hotel welcomes you very much, respected Mr. Queen Bee." After saying that, he took the 4 gold coins at the front desk into the counter with both hands, leaving Sherlock alone, looking at John Wick, and then at the extremely gentlemanly black receptionist with a confused face. Mr. Queen Bee. Sherlock had a lot of old grudges stuck in his throat, and for a moment he always felt like he couldn't get it out. After all, in Sherlock's cognition, the word Queen Bee is mostly used to describe women. I don't know why there is a code name for the Queen Bee, but don't these people feel awkward to add the suffix Mr. after the Queen Bee? Fortunately, Sherlock still has the most basic rationality. The environment around him, which is like an aristocratic club, is enough for Sherlock to hold back his complaints. However, John Wick soon noticed that Sherlock was different and gave Sherlock a look that said, "I will explain it later." Then, he turned his head and looked at the black receptionist who was still operating something. After a while, the black receptionist had finished all the operations, looked up at John Wick and Sherlock and said, "Because of the rules of the Continental Hotel, Mr. John Wick, we will not assign mandatory tasks to Mr. Queen Bee. Similarly, the support Mr. Queen Bee can get in the Continental Hotel will be limited. These rules are not aimed at anyone, but are just to better ensure the safety of Mr. Queen Bee. Similarly, Mr. Queen Bee's identity will be kept highly confidential in the Continental Hotel. Do you have any questions?" Facing the black man's questions, John Wick did not say much. Instead, Sherlock could not hold back his curiosity and asked his own questions at the black receptionist. Mandatory tasks? The Continental Hotel will also assign mandatory tasks to killers? After Sherlock finished speaking, he looked at John Wick beside him in confusion. After all, Sherlock rarely saw John Wick perform any mandatory tasks. Of course, it is also possible that he opened a gun store all the time and did not know it. Looking at Sherlock's questions, John Wick did not let the black receptionist speak this time. Instead, he spoke first to explain to Sherlock. The so-called mandatory tasks are not all mandatory. Generally speaking, the hotel's practice is to offer a price that the killer cannot refuse, plus intelligence, promises and other conditions to lure the killer to take the task. If you don't need these, you can naturally refuse this so-called mandatory task, but if you refuse, you will need to pay a gold coin as a price, which is equivalent to nothing for ordinary killers. But because of the reward, few people can refuse the temptation, so it is called a mandatory task. After hearing John Wick's explanation, Sherlock finally understood. To put it bluntly, isn't it just a routine of doubling the project bonus to tempt workers to work overtime desperately? Before Sherlock traveled through time, he was a qualified social animal, and he was very clear about these expressions. Don't you see? Before traveling through time, Sherlock traveled through time while shitting for that little overtime pay and bonus 996. Seeing that Sherlock no longer had any questions, the black receptionist nodded to the two of them and continued. "Very good, gentlemen, then we will continue the trust registration process of Mr. Queen Bee. According to the process, I need Mr. Queen Bee to provide me with a code name to be used as a name in the system of the Continental Hotel. Please note that once it is confirmed, it cannot be changed. In the future records, the code name will also be used to call Mr. Queen Bee. Your identity as Mr. Queen Bee will only exist in the secret files on the high platform of the Continental Hotel." Listening to the words of the black front desk, Sherlock immediately began to think about his code name. To be honest, Sherlock is a loser in naming. Often when it comes to this time, Sherlock will be at a loss. Serious code names such as wizards and death are constantly surging in Sherlock's mind, and Sherlock is constantly choosing between the good and bad code names. But suddenly, Sherlock's fun-loving attributes suddenly occupied the high ground, and even got out of control. "Brain, please, wouldn't it be nice to go for a cool normal code name? It's face-saving and nice to say it out." And the soul of the fun-loving person said that I must sell this sword today. So, under the leadership of the Fu Manchu, Sherlock didn't know what was going on and directly denied those titles that sounded very cool and came up with a code name that no one expected. One Piece. When Sherlock said the 3 words One Piece, Sherlock clearly saw that the elegant black receptionist froze in place and even couldn't help twitching at the corners of his mouth. John Wick, who knew what Sherlock was like, covered his forehead helplessly and couldn't help fantasizing about the future. Look, that's the apprentice of the famous legendary killer night demon, the One Piece. Just thinking about it, John Wick felt goosebumps all over his body. Seeing that the two seemed to be looking at him with accusatory eyes, without saying anything. Their eyes were full of a kind of please, change the code name, Continental Hotel / John Wick can't afford to lose that person. Sherlock's soul of fun was once again extremely satisfied, and the corners of his mouth could not help but rise. What's wrong? Is One Piece not good? What about Naruto? Captain General? Magic Boy? The strongest on earth? One Sword Shura? I think they're all good. I won't be picky. You decide. Chapter 84 Continental Hotels and Services. In fact, the code names Sherlock thought of were all meaningful. If he really couldn't survive and became a killer in the future, would he feel humiliated when his targets found out that he was targeted by the Pirate King? If he was really killed, it would be a double humiliation. Just like netizens had to name the aircraft carrier Pippi Shrimp and the missile Dabadao. Pippi Shrimp targeted our warship, and its frigate launched the Dabadao missile. The Dabadao was approaching. Intercept. Intercept. Interception failed. Our XXX ship was sunk by the Dabadao. No one can endure such a double attack of physical and mental attacks. No one. But unfortunately, John Wick and the Continental Hotel didn't know Sherlock's jokes. So when faced with Sherlock's ridiculous code names, both John Wick and the elegant black receptionist reacted in a surprisingly consistent manner. Listening to Sherlock's increasingly outrageous code names, John Wick began to regret agreeing to let Price take Sherlock for the second time, but fortunately, as a mentor, John Wick still had the final say on Sherlock's matters. Soon, all the code names given to Sherlock were ejected by John Wick on the spot, and he asked the front desk to register a code name called Magician for Sherlock. Sherlock was naturally very disappointed, but he didn't say much. After all, this was the Continental Hotel, where John Wick worked, and Sherlock naturally had to give John Wick face, so he didn't say much. Seeing that Sherlock didn't object to the code name he gave Sherlock, John Wick was relieved, and began to continue the process with the black front desk. After a while, a box of business cards printed with Sherlock's code name was delivered to John Wick. Sherlock took the business card from John Wick, and looked at it curiously. In addition to the symbol of the Continental Hotel, there was only a code name and a phone number, but it was obvious that the phone number on it was not Sherlock's own, but an unfamiliar phone number. After seeing Sherlock staring at the business card for a long time, the black receptionist also gave Sherlock an explanation. Mr. Magician, the phone number above is from the Continental Hotel. If someone contacts through the business card, the Continental Hotel will help transfer the call, so as to avoid being tracked as much as possible. After listening to the receptionist's words, Sherlock just nodded and didn't take it to heart. After all, this is Marvel, not the real killer universe. Sherlock would not be surprised by anything that happened in Marvel, where black technology is flying all over the sky. It's just a simple phone transfer. Sherlock really doesn't need to care about this. What's more, if nothing unexpected happens, as soon as the plot of the Avengers begins, Sherlock will directly give up his summer job and start to have fun with his vest. Seeing that Sherlock didn't make any more trouble, John Wick also breathed a sigh of relief, and then took out 4 gold coins and put them on the front desk. Clothes, weapons, mine and his. After hearing John Wick's request, the receptionist nodded slightly, stretched out his hand to take the 4 gold coins, and made a gesture of invitation to John Wick. John Wick and Sherlock followed the black receptionist to a tailor. Sherlock also saw the legendary bulletproof suit, but Sherlock knew nothing about the professional terms for those suits. In the end, it was only with the help of John Wick that he thought of a suit that fit him. You know, this is Sherlock's first high-end formal suit in the true sense. After that, John Wick led Sherlock to the weapon store to choose the weapons he would use. Sherlock didn't understand the jargon about John Wick and the gunsmith's dinner and dessert, and devoted himself to the weapons on the wall. As a weapon store owner, Sherlock was jealous of this weapon store. The reason was very simple. All the guns were high-end versions without exception. You know, many of these high-end versions of guns are usually bought and collected by some wealthy people. But now, here, these high-end guns that are stronger than traditional guns have shown their fangs for the first time, proving that they are more perfect killing weapons. In fact, Sherlock's gun shop also has high-end products, but it is definitely not as high-end as here. After all, not everyone can afford this stuff. Of course, Sherlock also knows the value of the gold coins of the Continental Hotel. One gold coin costs $300,000. Sherlock will naturally not let John Wick pay for it. Although as Sherlock's mentor, John Wick thinks that this money is normally paid by the mentor. After the two chose the guns, John Wick spent another gold coin to open a room in the Continental Hotel, waiting for the delivery of the new mission and equipment. The Continental Hotel has special novice missions for these combinations with newcomers. Generally speaking, there will be only 3 new missions, and all the proceeds of the 3 missions will belong to the mentor. This is the rule of the killer industry. Sherlock didn't know this. In the spirit of not wanting his friends to suffer, Sherlock took out a top dagger from Asgard, a set of armor and a bulletproof vest from his library, and gave them to John Wick. After entering the room with John Wick, although John Wick knew that Sherlock had some unknown magical abilities, he was still surprised to see Sherlock take out so many things out of thin air. He didn't bother to collect the things, but repeatedly warned Sherlock not to show these magical abilities in front of other people in the Continental Hotel. He even told Sherlock that within the sphere of influence of the Continental Hotel, unless it was a situation where he was bound to die, Sherlock could only be an ordinary person here. John Wick believed in the reputation of the Continental Hotel, and believed that as the Queen Bee, the Continental Hotel would give Sherlock the privilege of confidentiality, but he didn't believe in other killers. After Sherlock agreed to John Wick's request, Sherlock no longer concealed it, and began to use alchemy to refine the armor from Asgard for John Wick, trying to transform the appearance of this armor into a common dress. Of course, all this was not done behind John Wick's back, but in front of him. After all, compared with the master and apprentice of other killers, the relationship between Sherlock and John Wick is more like good friends. Sherlock even met John Wick's wife, who is an ordinary person. Although John Wick was full of curiosity about Sherlock's ability, due to the environment and the relationship between his friends, John Wick did not explore Sherlock's secrets. He just watched Sherlock constantly changing the appearance of the armor with alchemy, and explained to Sherlock what those so-called nouns meant. It was only then that Sherlock knew why he was called Mr. Queen Bee by the elegant black receptionist. Chapter 85, The Killer's Common Sense. As we all know, Sherlock's name is the gun shop, and the students in the actual training camp have various identities. Officials, gangs, killers, mercenaries, etc. are countless, but any profession related to guns cannot escape the basic training of the training camp. And Sherlock's training camp is also the best and fastest training camp on the entire east coast of Lighthouse that can allow an ordinary person to master the basics of guns. Of course, there are advanced courses in the training camp, and even those courses are taught by the top people in the industry, but the price is also not affordable for those novices in those forces that only want to train novices. Take the gangs as an example. As long as they graduate from the basic training camp, it is enough for the trained students to become a leader in the gang. Even if they are lucky, it is not impossible to become a hall master. On the other hand, the profession of killer is different from the blacklist. The many jargons and rules in the killer require a mentor to guide those rookies who have just graduated and know nothing. Therefore, in the killer industry, the players who can graduate from the basic training camp have only stepped over the threshold. Only after truly completing the 3 novice tasks will he be recognized as a real registered killer by the mainland hotel. Otherwise he will only be a mediocre little bee in this life. That's right, the killer industry calls the newcomers who have just entered the industry little bees. They have a certain attack power, but the attack power is not strong. They can kill people occasionally, but most of the time they can only make people swollen for a while, and they can be cured in minutes, as long as they go to the hospital. Naturally, Sherlock's training camp is called a beehive, and it is not surprising that Sherlock, as the owner of the beehive, is called the queen bee. Similarly, different forces have different names for Sherlock's training camp, and Sherlock is also called differently. As far as John Wick knows, in the mercenary industry, Sherlock's training camp is called a recruit camp, and Sherlock is called the battalion commander. On the gang side, it is more interesting. Generally speaking, the boss will select some trustworthy and loyal subordinates to send to training, and those who graduate and come back will be promoted without exception. So for the gangsters, Sherlock's training camp is like a school for further studies, so Sherlock's training camp is affectionately called a school, and Sherlock is the principal. Some people may say that it is too sci-fi, that gangsters like schools, because few gangsters like to go to school. But the fact is that Sherlock's training camp can attract gang members, and even the higher the position in the gang, the more they like gangsters with high education. Because of the national conditions here in the lighthouse, many gang members actually have no books to read, not that they don't like to read. Although there are many community schools and religious schools that are free, they can't resist the fact that free schools like happy education, and they are indeed very happy. Kuang has studied for several years, but he didn't learn anything, and he was just happy. This information was the first time Sherlock knew it, and he was so surprised that he almost made an irreversible mistake in the alchemy in his hand. Fortunately, Sherlock discovered it in time and reversed it. Sherlock never thought that there would be so much talk about the training camp that his uncles had set up, nor did he expect that he would be famous in the eyes of so many forces because of his uncle's training camp. No wonder the original owner had never suffered any bullying in his limited memory. With this background, it would be quite explosive, no matter where he was. Who would dare to let the original owner try the characteristics of an American school? Of course, after knowing this information, Sherlock couldn't help but start to be curious about those advanced trainings, and couldn't help but ask John Wick about his family situation. Although he was a little puzzled that Sherlock needed to ask about his family situation from an outsider, John Wick still answered Sherlock's question. The so-called advanced training camp, because of its high price, is certainly not something that those forces can show off as many people as the novice training camp. And because the forces they belong to are different, the focus is of course different. Many forces will sign up for advanced classes for their elites according to the actual situation. Mercenaries prefer physical training. Hell Week is the favorite project of those mercenary bosses, which is where Sherlock saw two little girls holding guns and scolding students when he came back from Asgard. It is a paradise for mercenaries. Most of those who can walk out of there alive will become the ones who have the longest time and the most kills on the battlefield. Of course, the elimination rate there is also terrible. Many people can't stand the dual stimulation from the mind to the body there. On the other hand, the close tactical training, that is, the place where the captain trains, is a paradise for killers, because they are in the city and often face their peers or bodyguards, so CQB is inevitable. Naturally, it is a paradise for training. Of course, in addition to there are also various advanced shooting courses that are a paradise for killers. You should know that John Wick himself is one of the instructors of the advanced shooting course. In addition, the gangs prefer bodyguard courses in their choices, while the official ones are comprehensive development, and even many times they are customized, such as the last captain's training was customized. Sherlock listened with great interest. Many of the things John Wick said were the first time Sherlock knew them. Of course, Sherlock's work did not stop. Soon, with the end of John Wick's explanation, a black tights was formed in Sherlock's hands. Although this thing feels like a tights to the touch and even to wear, it is made of Asgard armor. Sherlock retained the ability of the armor to the maximum extent when changing the color and appearance of the armor. John Wick tried it on briefly. It was very close fitting and comfortable. The lining material made John Wick feel that he was not wearing a piece of armor, but made him feel like he was wearing a tight sportswear. Especially after Sherlock knew the protective power of this armor, John Wick almost returned the armor to Sherlock. After all, it can defend against 10 rounds of 7.62mm caliber full power bullets from the same place. In this regard, Sherlock hastily refused. After all, this thing is not very meaningful to Sherlock, and Sherlock himself is better. Although this thing is precious enough in John Wick's eyes, it is not very precious to Sherlock. On the contrary, it is because, although this thing can defend against bullets, it cannot defend against pain and impact, so Sherlock dislikes it. Sherlock will never forget the heart-wrenching feeling when he was hit by a 7.62mm full-power bullet when he was studying this thing. Chapter 86 Magic's Altered Fishes Killer's Daily Life 1. It has to be said that the efficiency of the Continental Hotel is still very high. The two only placed orders in the morning, and the items were delivered to the gate at noon. The waiter also used a trolley to deliver them in a very ceremonial way. Seeing that all the equipment had been delivered, Sherlock and John Wick quickly changed into their exquisite suits and began to check their weapon boxes. Until now, Sherlock has only just discovered that his weapon box is different from John Wick's. When choosing guns, Sherlock was attracted by the wall of Terran tactics and didn't pay attention to what weapons John Wick chose. Don't blame Sherlock for being ignorant. You know, although there are no movies in the John Wick series here, Terran Tactics is a gunsmith company that is more popular here than before the time travel. Moreover, this company claims to be absolutely fair. Even if you are the president, you need to queue up, and the company's gun modification service has been booked for 5 years later. Sherlock also wanted to get one at the time, but looking at the troublesome process and the terrifyingly long waiting time, he finally gave up this unrealistic idea. At the Continental Hotel, what did Sherlock see? Damn, a wall full of Terran tactics. So most of your production capacity is supplied to the Continental Hotel, right? Based on this, Sherlock was naturally not polite when choosing firearms. He directly arranged the TIG Glock 34 pistol that he had been thinking about for a long time, and even thoughtfully selected 5 magazines and a silencer. After that, Sherlock was content to admire his precious firearms on the side. As for why he didn't pick some other firearms, Sherlock would tell you that the first reason was that he didn't want John Wick to spend more money, and the second reason was that when he was watching the John Wick series, he was obsessed with small pistols and silencers, so he didn't pay attention to other firearms. It was not until all the equipment was delivered that Sherlock realized the difference between himself and John Wick. He only had an equipment box the size of a pistol box, while John Wick had an equipment box that looked about the same size as a suitcase. But Sherlock didn't think much about it. Sherlock, who had seen the movie, thought that there was more than one pistol in it, and there might be equipment such as daggers and bombs. After the two checked their equipment, John Wick took out a lock from his pocket and threw it to Sherlock, signaling Sherlock to lock the equipment box. After the two locked the box, Sherlock returned to the front desk under the leadership of John Wick. After paying 6 gold coins, the two got into a big car prepared by the hotel under the attentive service of the waiter. The big car was driven by the driver very elegantly along the way, and even arrived at the airport without encountering any obstacles. When Sherlock got off the car, he found that a small private plane had been prepared next to it, waiting for the two to board. Even the equipment of the two was sent to the plane by the Continental Hotel before them. Until Sherlock sat on the soft sofa of the private plane, Sherlock sighed in his heart about the convenience of the Continental Hotel. This set of small procedures really touched Sherlock's heart. Such high quality service for the two only cost 6 gold coins. But the next second Sherlock thought of the price of a gold coin of $300,000, and the beautiful mood disappeared without a trace, and there was no difference. Spend $1.8 million and you can enjoy any service. Fortunately, John Wick didn't know what Sherlock was thinking. After the plane took off, the stewardess smiled and put a meal that looked expensive and a document in front of the two of them. Sherlock and John Wick were not polite. They started to enjoy their lunch while looking at the contents of the document. The document contained the target of this mission, a typical Latin American with a full beard, a cigar in his mouth, and a proud smile. Just looking at the photo, you can tell that this guy is a character who is second to none, and is definitely not easy to get along with. Until Sherlock began to look at the details of this guy's information, Sherlock felt that he was still young and inexperienced, and it was too early to draw a conclusion. This guy's name is Ratchet Saavedra, a big boss in the traditional industry in Mexico, that is, FD. And Ratchet Saavedra's experience is also legendary, and even movies dare not shoot like this. At the beginning, Ratchet Saavedra was born in an ordinary middle-class family. This guy is just like many Mexican children. He goes to school and plays under the care of his parents. He looks ordinary. Until he finished college in Lighthouse, he was full of confidence and wanted to go home to make a career. Then he was slapped hard by reality and became depressed. Of course, these are not the main reasons. The main reason is that he saw his girlfriend break up with him and get a Mercedes-Benz. Then this guy's mood changed drastically and his mind was full of how to get rich. Fortunately, he really found a guidebook on how to get rich, the criminal law. After studying the criminal law for a whole year, Ratchet Saavedra seemed to have opened his Renandu meridians and began to make money crazily. Moreover, he also deeply implemented the clauses in the Book of Wealth in his style of doing things and completely implemented the action policy of I will not do it if the criminal law does not stipulate it, and I will do it to death if the criminal law stipulates it. In just a few years, the criminal law is worthy of the title of a guide to getting rich quickly. In addition, Ratchet Saavedra was very generous after he became rich. The combination of the two successfully led Ratchet Saavedra to the top of the rich list and became an underground rich man known to everyone in Latin America. Of course, this is not the most exciting thing. The most exciting thing is the hobby of this Ratchet Saavedra. It may be in line with the saying that people will eventually be trapped by things they don't have when they are young. Ratchet Saavedra's favorite thing after he became rich is to keep mistresses. He has a lot of mistresses, more than 30, and they all live together. When Sherlock saw this, he felt that his 3 views were about to be refreshed. After taking a sip of the juice on the table, he sighed that this old wall lamp was played like an ancient emperor. In fact, Ratchet Saavedra was indeed one of the underground local tyrants. Looking at this Ratchet Saavedra's life, with the blessing of more than 30 mistresses, this Ratchet Saavedra had 70 or 80 children. Of course, it may be because he did too many immoral things. Many of these children died, either in the fight with the enemy or in the fight with their own father. Chapter 87 Magic Salted Fishes Killer's Daily Life 2. Not only is the mortality rate of children high, according to the information, Ratchet Saavedra also has a special bad habit. That is, he is extremely biased towards boys. No matter how excellent his daughters are, in Ratchet Saavedra's view, they are just tools to consolidate his status and money. Under the blessing of this idea, many of Ratchet Saavedra's daughters were married to partners or subordinates by Ratchet Saavedra to consolidate his power. Under the guidance of such ideas, those daughters usually did not live up to expectations. Looking at the princesses who married in ancient times is enough to get a glimpse of the leopard. Of course, it is not that no one resisted Ratchet Saavedra. One of his sons led a group of people to rebel against Ratchet Saavedra because he was dissatisfied with Ratchet Saavedra's marriage of his sister to a partner with a bad reputation. The result is naturally needless to say. He was directly suppressed by Ratchet Saavedra, and even Ratchet Saavedra, a ruthless man, personally shot the child and the child's mother. Sherlock was so shocked by the contents of these materials that he exclaimed, "Wow, Hollywood scripts are still too conservative. This guy's life will definitely sell well if it is written into a script and made into an American TV series. Since it dares to be called a Hollywood script, there will naturally be a reversal later. The biggest reversal is the client of this mission, Elisa Saavedra, the oldest daughter of Ratchet Saavedra. She is also the military strategist who has planned many things in the Ratchet Saavedra group, and she has a feeling of a female's huge. Although his daughter is so outstanding, Ratchet Saavedra still insists on marrying his daughter to a senior official who is close to 60 years old. Under pressure, this Elisa Saavedra secretly contacted the Continental Hotel and asked to assassinate her old father. And according to the information, in order to smoothly take over all the industries of her old father after his death, Elisa Saavedra has secretly made a lot of preparations. Sherlock looked at the information in his hand, which included palace fighting, crime, power struggle, family ethics and other element. He couldn't help but sigh while sitting on the sofa. It turned out that art comes from life and is higher than life. Damn, this script is definitely an Oscar level script. If a good director and good actors are found to make a series of movies, it will definitely sweep the Oscars. John Wick, who was sitting on the side, looked at Sherlock's wonderful expression when he read the information, and even made a few sighs from time to time, as well as a few sentences from time to time, that this is not as exciting as Hollywood. In the end, he couldn't help but look at Sherlock and asked, "What have you been sighing about since just now? What happened?" It would have been better if John Wick didn't ask. Instead, he asked Sherlock and confused him. He handed the information of the oily mission target in his hand to John Wick. The information of the mission target, isn't it written in your information? Looking at John Wick's expression, Sherlock felt something was wrong. After stuffing the information in his hand into John Wick's hand, he picked up John Wick's information and read it. It didn't matter that Sherlock wanted to curse immediately. John Wick's information didn't contain Sherlock's bloody life stories. It only contained the mission target's itinerary, the place where he appeared, the surrounding environment, security forces and other practical information. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped when he saw it. My goodness, the mainland hotel still treated people differently. Otherwise, how could he explain that his information was all gossip, while John Wick's information was all practical information? Seeing Sherlock's look of feeling the disparity of the world, John Wick just explained to Sherlock, while looking at the gossip about the mission target, that Sherlock handed over. Don't think too much. You are the Queen Bee. The Continental Hotel needs to explain the cause and effect of the mission target and even the client's information to you. Ordinary killers don't have this treatment. And generally speaking, as a newcomer, usually no information is given. Most of them are placed in the hands of the mentor and follow the mentor's arrangement. Only after the mission is completed, the mentor will give the information in his hand to the newcomer and ask the newcomer to reverse the mission process. You are already a privilege of the Queen Bee. By the way, this rat Salvador is very playful. Listening to John Wick's explanation, Sherlock reluctantly accepted the so-called discrimination of the Continental Hotel and began to discuss the gossip of the mission target with John Wick with peace of mind. Facts have proved that, as long as you are a human, no one can resist the temptation of gossip, even if this person is a living legend, and the killing god who kills one person after another throughout the movie is the same. With the sound of the two discussing gossip, the plane gradually landed. The two stopped discussing the gossip about the mission target and got off the plane with their respective equipment. This is Sherlock's first time to set foot on Mexican soil. The joy of going abroad disappeared without a trace until he stepped onto the plane's gangway and saw the next vehicle. Can anyone tell me what the situation is with the Iraqi-made happy car parked next to the plane's gangway? Looking at this pickup truck that seems to be made in Afghanistan, and then looking at the private plane behind him, and the exquisite suits on the two people, Sherlock once thought that he had walked into the wrong set. Well, Sherlock can tolerate the fact that the pickup truck is a little broken, but can you explain why he and John Wick spent $1.8 million and got a low-end happy car? Don't ask Sherlock how he knows. The tripod in the back box was not even disassembled, and it was firmly welded in the back box. Anyone knows that this thing is a low end. But it is obvious that John Wick was not surprised by the appearance of this car. He threw his box into the back box and ran into the cab without hesitation. Seeing Sherlock still standing there in a daze, John Wick honked the horn helplessly to signal Sherlock to get in the car quickly. Seeing that his mentor had already got in the car, Sherlock had no choice but to get in the car reluctantly with an expression that was completely different from what I had imagined. It didn't matter that he got in the car. After seeing the layout of the car clearly, Sherlock exclaimed, "Wow." The back table of the entire pickup truck had been removed, leaving only two large barrels and thermite on the two barrels. The whole car is bluntly a mobile incendiary bomb. Seeing Sherlock's expression of "what the hell is this?" John Wick explained to Sherlock while driving. Don't think too much, it's just to facilitate the destruction of evidence. Chapter 88 Magic's Altered Fishes Killer's Daily Life 3. What made Sherlock feel distressed was that under John Wick's driving, this Iraqi-style happy car never entered the city. After leaving the airport, John Wick led Sherlock to drive into some small roads in the rainforest. There was not even a road here, only the so-called dirt road. Fortunately, it has not rained recently, and the road is still dry. Otherwise Sherlock is really afraid that the mission will fail because of this happy car before reaching the destination. Despite this, the big dirt road with potholes and holes that looked like it was chewed by a dog was enough for Sherlock to doubt his life, and even made Sherlock think that he was not in Mexico, but in South Africa, where Obadiah drove a truck. The bumpy road, coupled with the hardcore leaf springs of the happy car, made Sherlock open the car name and rush out. As soon as John Wick stopped the car, without any hesitation, he found a tree to hug and began to vomit. Fortunately, Sherlock did not have much in his stomach at this time, otherwise he would definitely show what it means to spray. But obviously, John Wick, the driver, was not affected much. When Sherlock was holding the tree and doubting his life, John Wick had already raised his telescope and started to observe the large villa on the other side, which was very large, luxuriously decorated and modern. When Sherlock came back to his senses and came to John Wick did not put down the telescope in his hand, but simply said to Sherlock, "According to the information, the target will hold an important cocktail party in that villa tonight. The purpose is to entertain his partners. We need to kill the target before the end of this cocktail party." Listening to John Wick's words, Sherlock, who was a little uncomfortable at first, suddenly became excited. He turned his wrist and took out a Obadiah-style evil ghost mask from his library and put it on his face. He ran to the back of the car and took out the box of the equipment he had chosen. When he opened it, a TIG Glock 34, 5 magazines and a silencer were quietly spread out in the box. Sherlock put the 4 spare magazines in his library without any hesitation, screwed the silencer on the pistol, and then pushed the magazine into the magazine. With a crisp sound of loading, Sherlock even performed a classic one-handed check and reload in front of John Wick. After doing all this, Sherlock took the gun in his hand, kept the posture of holding the gun on the central axis, looked at John Wick excitedly, and said to John Wick, "I'm ready. Should we wait for the cocktail party to start before going in, or go in now?" John Wick looked at Sherlock with an excited face. For some reason, he always felt that Sherlock had misunderstood something. He rubbed his head with a headache, and then came to the back and threw his weapon box and a blanket, which was about the size of a suitcase, to Sherlock. Sherlock opened John Wick's weapon box with a confused look at John Wick's signal, and a high-precision sniper rifle lay tightly inside. Combined with the blanket and the villa not far away, Sherlock knew what John Wick meant, even if he was stupid. In an instant, Sherlock changed from an excited face to a bitter face. This was not the fast pursuit he imagined. It was not the killer life he imagined. That's John Wick, or thug in a suit. Shouldn't he just use a pistol or a rifle, perform various tactical moves, and then shoot 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head? What the hell is sniping? Sherlock even wondered if John Wick had been replaced, or if his John Wick was not the John Wick in John Wick. Seeing Sherlock obviously misunderstood something, John Wick gave Sherlock a slap on the head and then said to Sherlock righteously, "Don't do anything unnecessary. Since the employer has given detailed intelligence, it is hoped that in addition to the target, there will be as little panic and loss as possible. Although your way of rushing in can complete the task, you will definitely be complained by the employer afterwards, and it is not impossible that you will be hunted down. The killer must understand the meaning of the intelligence and choose the most efficient and simple way to execute the task. Price has already told me about your situation. You should have participated in the sniper course and your grades are not bad. You are the sniper, and I'm the observer. Listen to my command, and strive to kill with 1 shot." Listening to John Wick's request, what else can Sherlock do? He laid out the blanket, set up the sniper rifle, and waited quietly for John Wick's order. As time passed, the sky became darker and darker. Gradually, the huge villa began to become lively. Through the scope, Sherlock clearly saw all kinds of luxury cars gathering at the door of the villa. At the door of the villa, a woman in a dress, with an explosive figure and a large brimmed hat, who looked like Mrs. Dimitrescu in The Biochemical Crisis, was receiving guests one by one at the door. Of course, this woman was not as tall as Mrs. Dimitrescu, and she looked a little thinner, but it did not affect Sherlock's ability to tell the identity of this lady at once. It was the employer of this mission, one of the daughters of Rachid Savadra, and the smartest person in the entire Rachid Savadra group, Alyssa Savadra. Looking at Alyssa Saavedra's actions throughout the cocktail party, Sherlock knew that, as long as Ratchet Saavedra died, Alyssa Saavedra would be able to successfully replace his father and become one of the best underground emperors in South America. As time passed, the atmosphere in the villa gradually reached a climax, and Sherlock also pulled the trigger and fired a boring shot under John Wick's order. After confirming the target's death, the two no longer hesitated to quickly pack up their things and drove away from the scene in the old brother's happy car. But what made Sherlock happy was that this time, not long after the old brother's happy car drove out, John Wick stopped the car and asked Sherlock to get out of the car. After throwing the sniper rifle that had been fired on the car, John Wick started the thermite in the car without hesitation. The two watched the old brother's happy car slowly turn into a pile of ruins. After the simple car frame was left, John Wick took out his mobile phone. Not long after a phone call, an off-road vehicle that Sherlock didn't know the brand but looked extremely luxurious stopped in front of the two. Sherlock recognized the Continental Hotel logo on the car. An hour later, Sherlock collapsed on the big bed in the room of the Continental Hotel with a dull look on his face. It must be said that the Continental Hotel is really meticulous. In the morning, he was still in the lighthouse, and even his personal belongings were in the room of the Continental Hotel in the lighthouse. At night, Sherlock was in the Continental Hotel on the Mexican side. The personal belongings that were still in the lighthouse in the morning also appeared in the room of the Continental Hotel in Mexico, and even the position did not move at all. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89 Magic Salted Fish's Killer's Daily Life 4. In an unknown rainforest, Sherlock lay on a not-so-clean blanket with a calm face, holding a grass in his mouth, and looking up at the blue sky in boredom. He no longer wore the exquisite suits of the past, but only big shorts, flip-flops and a big vest that looked like he had been wearing it for a long time. Thanks to the existence of magic. Otherwise, if Sherlock was in the rainforest, it would be a pure thanks to the insects in the rainforest for helping themselves to nature. Everyone who knows Sherlock knows that Sherlock's performance has already shown that Sherlock is already impatient at this moment. As for what Sherlock is impatient about, is there any need to ask? Of course, he is impatient with his career as a killer. This is not at all what he imagined. The daily life of a killer in imagination, holding a pistol and wearing a suit, elegantly killing into the crowd, accompanied by the screams of the crowd, using various tactical moves to show the enemy what it means to shoot 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head. Even if God comes, it will be in vain. And the daily life of a killer in reality is just 4 words: sniper elite. It was totally different from what Sherlock had imagined. Sherlock even began to doubt whether the uncle next to him who looked exactly like Keanu Reeves was called John Wick or Carl Felber. The most important thing was that Sherlock felt that he had been deceived. He originally thought that such a simple sniper mission would only appear in the novice mission, which was a novice benefit. But this time was obviously his 4th mission. Logically speaking, he should have been a qualified killer and should even perform missions alone. But why was it still a sniper mission this time? And even his mentor John Wick was still by his side like the previous times, wearing a well-dressed suit and holding a telescope to look at the target building 1 kilometer away. In this regard, even John Wick, a living legendary killer, expressed helplessness. John Wick also knew that Sherlock began to feel impatient with such simple sniper-type killer missions, and he could see it without even knowing Sherlock. Just looking at the weapons Sherlock used in these 4 missions, you can see that the first time was still the most common sniper rifle, and the second time was replaced with the world's largest caliber anti-material sniper rifle. The third time was even more exaggerated. He directly used RPG. The most important thing was that he prepared more than 20 rounds of ammunition, which were mixed with armor-piercing and explosive shells. This wave really redefined the definition of sniping. As for this time, John Wick said that he was still not very knowledgeable and thought Sherlock was simple. Looking at the double-barreled anti-aircraft gun that had been laid flat beside him, John Wick already knew that Sherlock was extremely impatient with ordinary sniper missions. In fact, it's not John Wick's fault. John Wick also tried very hard to ask the Continental Hotel for tasks, but unfortunately, no matter what John Wick said, the Continental Hotel gave John Wick ordinary sniper tasks. Even for this matter, John Wick complained to a wave of local Continental hotels. Later, John Wick finally figured out what was going on. In fact, it's not others' fault. The most critical issue is Sherlock's identity. The Continental Hotel has been in business for a long time, so long that I don't know how many times I have experienced people with internal code names like Sherlock, or the second generation just wanted to try it out in person. Due to the identities of these people, the Continental Hotel could not refuse the idea of these people with internal code names or the second generation who wanted to try it out, and refusing this matter was inconsistent with the business philosophy of the Continental Hotel. In desperation, they could only agree to these people's joining. The most important thing is that among these contestants, who want to try what it feels like to be a killer, if they are like Sherlock who has his own power, and has received formal military training, then that's it. Most of them are stupid second generations who have not even received a formal military training, relying on the flattery of their fathers and subordinates and a little bit of the temptation of movies, to feel that they can do it. And the results of these people are usually not very good, and even the death of the second generation or people with internal code names has caused some interference to the operation of the Continental Hotel. Proud of these self-righteous SBS, the top management of the Continental Hotel, that is, the high platform, finally decided unanimously that all people with internal code names and their relatives are not allowed to be assigned to dangerous tasks, and when performing tasks, there must be a real killer next to them as a guardian. So for other killers in the Continental Hotel, the types of missions are always diverse, but for Sherlock, the types of missions are probably only sniper type. Even John Wick couldn't explain the situation directly to Sherlock. This matter was a secret in the Continental Hotel. John Wick got the information about this matter from a retired old killer by relying on his favors over the years. Of course, as a legendary killer, John Wick is not without a solution. He contacted Winston, the manager of the Continental Hotel in New York, who is most familiar with him, to explain the situation. In the end, Winston gave John Wick a solution with his cunningness, which allowed John Wick to accept a mission as the main body and Sherlock as a collaborator. Although the Continental Hotel does not recognize the identity of this collaborator and does not get any reward, Sherlock doesn't care. But if you do this, then Sherlock's safety is higher than the mission goal for John Wick. In other words, even if the mission fails, Sherlock's safety must be guaranteed. Since Sherlock exposed the armor in front of him, John Wick was not very worried about Sherlock's safety. He was more moved by Sherlock's trust in his killer, so he naturally agreed to Winston's proposal. Unfortunately, when Winston was solving the matter with John Wick had already taken over the sniper mission on behalf of Sherlock, which led to the first scene. Sherlock dressed as a landlord and appeared in a rainforest. Looking at Sherlock who seemed to be on vacation, John Wick finally sighed helplessly, put down the telescope in his hand, and looked at Sherlock who was lying on the blanket and looking at the sky. Don't be stupid, the target of the mission is about to appear. I promise you that this is the last sniper mission, and the next one will be the so-called killer mission you have been thinking about. After listening to John Wick's assurance, Sherlock sat up, and his expression of unworthiness on his face suddenly turned into starry eyes staring at John Wick. Do you promise? I promise. After getting John Wick's promise, Sherlock happily sat on the seat of the double-barreled anti-aircraft gun, put his eyes on the sight, and began to correct the trajectory. Seeing that Sherlock wanted to use this flat anti-aircraft gun to complete the task, John Wick's face changed again and again, and finally he couldn't help but said, "You still plan to use this to complete the task? Isn't it better to use a sniper rifle?" Listening to John Wick's complaints, Sherlock looked at John Wick with some doubts, and then put his eyes back on the sight and said, "Large caliber, with a scope, can kill people in seconds. This thing is a sniper." There is no doubt that Sherlock's wonderful remarks once again gave John Wick a little shock about the sniper theory. Chapter 90 Magic's Altered Fishes Killer's Daily Life 5. It turns out that Sherlock was right. When Sherlock saw the target, He stepped on the firing pedal. John Wick saw it clearly through the telescope. The target was blown away by the shell. Even if he wanted to spark, he couldn't do it. That guy was flying everywhere. In order to complete the task more thoroughly, Sherlock kept firing until the barrel of the gun turned red. This time, he even saved the funeral. Looking at the appearance of the beautiful villa that collapsed into ruins, it was not much different from a grave. John Wick's eyelids were twitching. "Done. One-stop service. Hurry up. Get out," Sherlock said as he put the anti-aircraft gun into his library, turned around and called John Wick to run away. John Wick could only follow Sherlock into the car and run away. Sherlock's one-stop service just echoed in his head, and he called out to him in his heart. The two who completed the task quickly returned to the local Continental Hotel. When John Wick submitted the task alone, he chose a task for himself in the way of Winston. The target of the task was a wealthy businessman. According to the intelligence, the wealthy businessman would hold a cocktail party on the top floor of the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in Dubai, one day later to celebrate his victory over his competitors. John Wick looked at the security force mentioned in the task, which was not too large, and the building like the Burj Khalifa also blocked the escape route of the target of the task very well. So John Wick made this unlucky guy the target of the task for Sherlock to experience life. What John Wick didn't know was that when he took the task, the whole underground world became a little uproar. In their opinion, a killer like John Wick should take over some tasks that seem very difficult. What virtue and ability does such a little Kalimi have to let a living legend take action? Winston, who was sitting in the manager's office of the Continental Hotel in New York, smiled meaningfully after learning the news. When John Wick accepted all the information of the mission and selected the weapons and returned to the room, Sherlock, who was wearing a suit and combed his hair meticulously, appeared in front of John Wick again. Looking at Sherlock with an expectant face, John Wick lost his temper. At this moment, he understood why Price wanted to get Sherlock out of the house. After briefly explaining some situations to Sherlock in the room, John Wick took Sherlock to Dubai in accordance with the extremely ritualistic way of traveling in the Continental Hotel. Although Sherlock felt that it was more convenient to use magic, Sherlock did not hate such a ritualistic behavior, so he did not say much. After arriving in Dubai, the two stayed directly in the hotel in the Burj Khalifa for convenience, quietly packed their equipment in the room, and prepared for tomorrow's mission. Sherlock did not know what John Wick's mentality was. Anyway, he was so excited that he didn't even worry about his safety at all. After all, he was full of magic. It is no exaggeration to say that, if the opponent's firepower is too strong, Sherlock does not mind changing his body, turning the pistol in his hand into a wand, and then using the wand to perform a few body and head operations. Even because of excessive excitement, Sherlock's mind was full of operations in the fast pursuit at night. Sherlock, who originally had excellent sleep quality, suffered from insomnia for the first time. After hesitating for a long time, Sherlock finally decided to let himself fall asleep quickly. After all, tomorrow is a tough battle. Out of respect for tomorrow's tough battle, Sherlock finally took out the wand, shot himself and fell to the ground, forcing himself to fall asleep. Thanks to the magic of magic, Sherlock felt an extremely comfortable feeling when he was awakened by John Wick the next morning. If you have to describe it, it is the feeling of sleeping very comfortably and being very full. After the two of them simply packed up their equipment, they walked into the emergency passage with guns under the leadership of John Wick. At this moment, Sherlock's dream of the fast pursuit series of tasks was officially launched. The two took the emergency passage all the way. It was not that they did not want to take the elevator, but it was too easy to be exposed and too dangerous. John Wick did not want Sherlock to take such a dangerous route. The two climbed up countless flights of stairs and finally arrived at the cocktail party. They did not encounter any security personnel throughout the whole process. John Wick was relieved. He signaled Sherlock to put away his gun temporarily. John Wick took out a master key from his trouser pocket and opened the emergency passage that was locked because of the cocktail party in a few clicks. The two of them mixed into the crowded crowd like guests. Sherlock followed John Wick's steps and moved forward in the crowded crowd one after another. Just as the two were concentrating on observing the surrounding environment and security forces, ready to take action at any time, a burst of music sounded from Sherlock. Then came the cheerful voices of two Lalita, which sounded very familiar. They were Lorna and Mindy. Hakami, Hakami, Hakami. This was recorded by Sherlock when he was at home doing nothing. John Wick looked at Sherlock with a look of disdain, and even began to doubt why he agreed to let Sherlock take him to carry out this mission. Sherlock looked apologetic, and quickly touched his pocket with both hands, to find the source of the voice, his mobile phone. Looking at the caller ID on it, Sherlock finally couldn't help, but chose to answer the phone despite John Wick's disdain and regret for lies. "My dear Uncle Tony, you'd better give me a good reason, otherwise I will definitely make you look good." Sherlock gritted his teeth, and whispered the identity of the other party. John Wick rolled his eyes helplessly, and pulled Sherlock to the buffet plate like a guest, and picked up something to eat. Seeing that John Wick didn't seem to urge him, Sherlock was relieved, and began to concentrate on waiting for Tony's answer. "Tony is Tony." The first thing he said made Sherlock's blood pressure rise. "What are you doing, little brat? Did I interrupt you?" Hearing Tony's nonsense, Sherlock regretted for a moment that he had answered Tony's call out of consideration for family affection. "You better be okay," Sherlock said, almost gritting his teeth. Chapter 91 Magic Salted Fishes Killer's Daily Life 6. Hearing Sherlock's gnashing tone, Tony on the other end of the phone laughed even more happily, not caring about Sherlock's attitude at all, but continued to talk cheerfully. Okay, we can do it anytime. There's a big fun I think you definitely don't want to miss." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock also became interested in an instant. As a fun person, the last thing Sherlock could do was to refuse a big fun. "Tell me more." Sherlock raised his eyebrows and said to Tony on the phone with an interested expression on his face. Hearing that Sherlock seemed to have taken the bait, Tony no longer hesitated and tried hard to suppress his smile and continued to explain to Sherlock. "You know Nick Fury, right? That's the black-boiled egg. Didn't he form a nanny alliance? I didn't agree at first, but he contacted me again just now. He wanted me to do him a favor, but I didn't agree directly at the time. I said I would think about it and hung up the phone. Then I asked Jarvis to hack into the SHIELD system to see what this black-boiled egg was up to. It doesn't matter if I don't look at it. I found something fun. You know the cosmic cube. It's the thing that the Red Skull wanted to use to dominate the world during World War II. This thing fell into the hands of SHIELD. SHIELD has been studying this thing for a while, trying to replicate the energy weapons of the Red Skull, but unfortunately, they obviously didn't learn the lessons from the Red Skull. According to the information I got, when they were studying this thing, a person jumped out of it, looking like Bambi. Then this Bambi destroyed the SHIELD laboratory, and I don't know what means he used to incite a large number of SHIELD agents to rebel. Black Egg also spent a lot of effort to escape. When he wanted to fight back, Bambi had already escaped. I guess if nothing unexpected happens, Black Egg contacted me about Bambi. Do you want to transform and have fun? I feel that Black Egg is about to be mad, looking for Bambi and the cosmic cube all over the world. Sherlock reacted when Tony was halfway through his words. Isn't this the plot of Avengers 1? Avengers 1 has already started. Sherlock began to get excited visibly, and answered Tony's words as soon as Tony's voice fell. Of course, I have to go. I'll find you when I'm done with things here. It would be a shame for my nature to watch such a big fun if I don't go and see it. Tony was not surprised at all when Sherlock agreed, and he said directly on the phone, "Okay, no problem. I'll let Jarvis project my location into your helmet in real time, and you can just come over when the time comes. By the way, what are you doing, kid? Why do I hear a woman's voice? You're not really doing anything, are you?" Tony was hung up mercilessly by Sherlock before he finished speaking. He looked at the rich woman holding a glass of wine and chatting happily with her girlfriend nearby with some resentment, and sighed helplessly. Then he began to look for John Wick's figure. He didn't know until he saw it. At a glance, Sherlock found that John Wick was already close to the target of this mission. Sherlock put on the evil ghost mask casually. He didn't want to expose his appearance. Just as he put on the mask, John Wick's gun had already fired. John Wick's gunshots were accompanied by women's screams and the panicked security guard's calls for reinforcement. Without any hesitation, Sherlock shot a bodyguard who was trying to get money from John Wick using the Mozambique shooting method. Sherlock quickly approached John Wick. "Retreat," John Wick said to Sherlock without any hesitation the moment Sherlock appeared beside him. Sherlock naturally had no objection. With the huge fun of the Avengers plot, the experience of chasing and killing at high speed was no longer so important to Sherlock. The two cooperated very well. Sherlock seemed to have trained countless times. He shot 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head, and John Wick shot alternately and began to retreat from the banquet. The rich businessman himself was not a top person, and the level of those bodyguards was naturally not as good as the two, but there were too many people on the opposite side. Even though they were both 3-gun, one-on-one killers, they were inevitably hit by a few bullets. Unfortunately, Sherlock had cast an armor spell on himself when John Wick took action, so the bullets could not hit Sherlock at all. John Wick on the other side put on the armor given to him by Sherlock before the mission began. It was only painful to be hit, and at most the bones were broken. For John Wick, it was just a little water. The two of them fought their way from the hotel to the road, and then they barely got rid of the attack of the pursuers. Although the two had gotten rid of the attack of the bodyguards, it did not mean that they were safe. They still had to face the pursuit of the police. Fortunately, John Wick, a veteran, was well prepared for such a situation. He took Sherlock to a parking lot without any hesitation. When the two returned to the road again, they were already sitting in a modified muscle car. It has to be said that the unlocking spell is sometimes really useful. Sherlock will never forget the expression on John Wick's face when he was holding a wire to pry open the car door, and then he casually opened the car door and got in the car after using the unlocking spell. Of course, Sherlock can open the door, but starting the engine is not Sherlock's business. With the roar of the engine, the two bypassed a lot of police blockades and came directly to a dock. The fate of the stolen modified muscle car was inevitably buried in the sea. Although Sherlock didn't understand why the two came to the dock, he still followed John Wick. John Wick did not disappoint Sherlock's expectations and found a container. After opening it, it was a room that looked like the room of the agents in the movie. John Wick called Sherlock in. The two changed clothes in this room, and even their identity passports. When the two came out again, how could they still look like the god of death just now? After completing the disguise, John Wick called Sherlock to take a taxi and drove towards the Continental Hotel. What? Why did Sherlock open the portal directly to return to New York? Please, Sherlock wants to go back to have fun, not to be the one who has fun. Imagine if Sherlock, an unknown person, appeared in front of those unfamiliar Avengers before Bambi Loki. Even with Tony's guarantee, Sherlock might have to experience a righteous group fight similar to Loki's. What's more, Sherlock still feels very tired on this mission. He can just go to the Continental Hotel to have a meal, take a shower, and pack up, and then follow the location to find Tony at night. I watched John Wick 4 when I wrote this picture. After watching it, I really didn't want to continue writing the plot of The Killer. Can you believe that JW is dead? In the third part, JW lost half his life to find the Elder, but he was shot in the head when the screen opened. That Duke was just showing off his suits throughout the whole process. He was useless otherwise, and even directly reduced his intelligence at the end. Although the fight was very good, to be honest, this plot is hard to describe. If you haven't seen it, you can go watch it. The fighting scenes are okay, but to be honest, I don't think it's as good as 123. Chapter 92, not a very pleasant meeting 1. Just as he thought, Sherlock calmly followed John Wick back to the Continental Hotel. As for the follow-up of the mission, neither John Wick nor Sherlock was worried. The Continental Hotel also had perfect measures to deal with such a situation. After the two killed the target and led away the security guards, the logistics cleanup team had already caught up. When the group of security guards who failed to catch Sherlock and John Wick returned to the so-called crime scene with the local police, there was no body at the scene, not to mention the body. Even the surveillance video at the scene disappeared without a trace. In the end, under the premise that there was no body and no evidence, the police could only treat it as a false alarm and let it go. In this regard, the Continental Hotel has been doing it for so many years, it can be said that it is well informed and does not need to worry about these things at all. What's more, the recovered bodies also have their uses. The industrial chain is not just talk. Sherlock took an ice bath in the hotel, then put on a soft and comfortable bathrobe, ordered a Wellington steak and a large portion of grilled ribs, and turned on the TV. After tuning the TV to the European channel, Sherlock ate the food in his hand while waiting quietly. As expected by Sherlock, in just a short while, the boring TV program originally played on the TV was replaced by an emergency live broadcast. Loki, wearing a classic dark green costume with a golden helmet with two big horns, and holding the scepter with the mind gem in his hand, appeared in the live TV. Sherlock smiled and watched Loki pretending to be cool on TV, while gnawing on the ribs in his hand, and sighed that it was a pity to waste this handsome face of Tom Hiddleston. You know, in the entire Marvel, Loki is Sherlock's favorite character, not because he is handsome or anything, but because he is interesting enough. Whether it is a feature film or a personal TV series, it is enough for a fun person to find his own happiness. Sherlock still can't forget his performance in his own independent TV series Loki. Not to mention the strange and varied Loki in different costumes. The fact that he fell in love with himself is enough to make Sherlock call him old Dan 666. If the two of them really had an accident, wouldn't it be like having sex with themselves and giving birth to themselves? This is definitely a new Nobel Prize paper in biology, and it might even create a new biological term, sexual self-splitting. Sherlock was chewing on the ribs while watching Loki on TV using the power of the Mind Stone to make everyone kneel down and raise their arms in an extremely enjoyable manner, and he called it a good meal. But Loki will always be Loki. As a good material for a funny person, this guy's pretense time will never exceed half an hour. As expected by Sherlock, Loki, who was indulging in the worship of everyone, was hit in the face by Captain's shield the next second. In an instant, the power of the Mind Stone failed, and the scene began to become chaotic. Captain and Tony pressed Loki to the ground in a few moves. Although he couldn't see the various weapons pointed at him from Loki's first-person perspective like in the movie, Sherlock still laughed very happily when he saw Loki's big man. The live broadcast on the scene also became a reporter's explanation under the intervention of S.H.I.E.L.D. After a while, it became an analysis and interpretation between the host and two guests. When he saw this, Sherlock had lost interest in watching it. He finished the food in front of him in a few bites, and then quickly cleaned up the grease and other dirt on his face. Then he found John Wick, and explained that he had something to do, and needed to go back early. Although John Wick was so happy that he almost cried, he pretended to understand Sherlock on the surface, and said that Sherlock was very talented in this line. Sherlock looked at John Wick's performance, and rolled his eyes to the sky. After all, he had been with John Wick for so long, and had been a guest at John Wick's house. Sherlock thought he knew this guy very well. Watching John Wick's performance, Sherlock didn't point it out. He rolled his eyes, and asked John Wick if he wanted to hitchhike back home quickly. John Wick agreed to Sherlock's invitation without hesitation. To be honest, if it weren't for Price's request, John Wick would never have left home for so long to take care of Sherlock. Under Sherlock's urging, John Wick quickly went to check out, and then took Sherlock to find an empty corner. Sherlock didn't hesitate, and opened the portal directly. On the other side of the portal was Sherlock's bedroom. John Wick sighed at Sherlock's magic, and pulled Sherlock across without hesitation. The two of them didn't use any documents when they came out, so now they don't have any psychological burden to go back. After returning to the familiar environment, John Wick said goodbye to Sherlock without hesitation. Sherlock didn't stop him, and watched John Wick quickly leave the gun store and walk towards his home. After making sure that no one would bother him again, Sherlock took out the collar rope from the library and gently pulled it to complete the transformation. Ding ding ding. Sherlock went offline, and the mysterious wizard who registered with S.H.I.E.L.D. came online. After Sherlock put on the vest and checked to make sure there was no problem, he put on the helmet and began to determine Tony's location. After a glance, Sherlock opened the portal without hesitation. There was a forest on the other side of the portal. Sherlock crossed over without hesitation, but unfortunately, Sherlock did not see Tony. He looked at the location sharing in the helmet with some doubts, and then Sherlock used the apparition to chase after him while cursing. As for why he cursed, the reason was very simple. According to the location sharing display, Tony was moving at a high speed at this time. If nothing unexpected happened, Tony should be on the shield plane at this time, and several people had just completed the task of arresting Loki. After several times of apparition, Sherlock finally caught up with Tony, and was surprised to find that Tony's position did not move any further. Sherlock then apparated again, cursing, and kept rehearsing in his mind how to pretend to meet the other Avengers for the first time. With a crackling sound of space distortion, Sherlock, wearing armor, appeared not far from Tony with a sound of space distortion. However, what Sherlock did not expect was that he had just appeared, and he was not greeted by the vigilant Avengers, but a meow hammer that seemed to be getting bigger in front of him. Chapter 93. Not a pleasant meeting too. Seeing the meow hammer getting closer and closer to his handsome face, Sherlock didn't want to experience what it felt like to be hit on the head by the meow hammer, even though he was wearing a helmet. Fortunately, Sherlock's reaction was quite fast, and he fell backwards in a bridge pose. The meow hammer flew backwards almost close to Sherlock's chest, and with his hands on the ground, he maintained the bridge pose. Sherlock clearly saw Tony, who was wearing armor behind him, cross his arms to block the attack of the meow hammer. Then Sherlock was horrified to find that, because of Tony's blocking, the meow hammer fell slightly, and then, under Thor's call, it flew towards Sherlock in a spiral. According to Sherlock's limited knowledge of physics and strong knowledge of trajectory, if he didn't do anything, there might be no problem with his head and body, but his little brother would inevitably have a close contact with the tumbling hammer handle. For the safety of his little brother, and not wanting to experience such a social death scene, as soon as he appeared, Sherlock was quick-witted and decisively loosened his limbs that were supporting the ground, and lay down peacefully on the ground. The meow hammer was also very face-saving, and flew back to Thor's hand, brushing Sherlock's little brother. At that moment, Sherlock felt a cool breeze despite the barrier of the armor. The shame and embarrassment turned into raging anger in an instant. Good Thor, it seems that I didn't deal with you lightly in Asgard. Get ready to accept the revenge of a fun person. On the other side, Thor had of course noticed Sherlock's appearance a long time ago, but seeing Sherlock's embarrassed appearance, Thor decided to focus more on the Iron Man behind the new person. At the moment, when Thor was distracted, the Elder Wand appeared in Sherlock's hand. With the appearance of the wand, Sherlock was furious and two spells flew towards Thor one after another. Thor was caught off guard, and was directly hit by Sherlock's spell. His clothes and even his meow hammer turned into a tender pink color with various Hello Kitty patterns on them. Especially the meow hammer. Under the effect of Sherlock's magic, it really became a meow hammer. There were Hello Kitty prints everywhere on the hammer, and even a Hello Kitty cat head with its tongue sticking out was on the striking surface. Thor himself was not feeling well either. Under Sherlock's spell, Thor's feet began to dance funny steps out of his control. No matter how hard Thor tried to control it, he couldn't stop his feet. Sherlock, who had let out a breath of satisfaction, had just stood up, and before Sherlock could make any move, Tony, who had just been hit by the meow hammer, turned around and fired a hand cannon at Thor. Since Sherlock was standing right between Tony and Thor, Tony's hand cannon almost brushed past Sherlock's scalp. At that moment, Sherlock's eyes widened, and he looked back in disbelief, as if to say, "Tony, what are you doing? I'm your closest relative. Your blood is thicker than water, your great nephew." Unfortunately, since Sherlock was wearing a helmet, Tony did not notice Sherlock's expression, but instead crossed his arms, as if he was ready to take off and fight in the air. Seeing that Tony not only did not apologize, but also pretended to ignore him and prepare to take off, Sherlock felt that his teeth were about to break, and for a time he felt that he did not check the almanac before going out today, and he was extremely unlucky. Why are they all so damn mean to him? Suddenly, he was furious and threw a hanging bell at Tony. Tony, who had just taken off, felt dizzy in an instant, and then the scene in front of him turned upside down. He looked at Sherlock standing in front of him with disbelief. "Brat, you don't help your uncle fight the opponent, but now you actually attack your dear uncle? Which side are you on? Get ready for a little education and shock from your dear uncle." Tony can be said to be more and more angry. regardless of whether it is upside down or not. He began to move upside down with the air compatibility of the iron armor, and even included Sherlock in his attack target. Thor on the other side was naturally not afraid. Although he was still dancing strange steps, he was not unable to move. As the best warrior in Asgard, he had encountered all kinds of situations. He just did it. So the picture of the three people began to become weird. Tony was like a ghost, hanging upside down in the air and drifting wildly under the action of the hand thruster. While moving, he poured out the firepower of his armor on Sherlock and Thor. His erratic and even up and down figure, coupled with the golden red armor and white eyes, made him look like a demon in the forest. The only time that people could feel that he was still a living person was when his head would hit the ground from time to time, when he used the leg thrusters to lower his altitude. The crisp sound from beginning to end proved that it was definitely a good head. Thor on the other side was not much behind, and his feet kept dancing. He was dressed in a pink Hello Kitty outfit, and the pink meow hammer printed with Hello Kitty in his hand danced vigorously. From time to time, he flew out to attack the two. Although the outfit made people feel that it was hard to describe, it always gave people a feeling of war dance with Salma's sturdy figure. It even made people feel a little bit handsome at one time. Of course, the premise is that you have to ignore the sexy pink clothes printed with Hello Kitty. Otherwise, it looks like a pervert who can dance at most. As for Sherlock, being sandwiched between the two, Sherlock seemed to be the only one who behaved normally among the three. However, he had no choice but to face his uncle on one side and Thor from the Avengers on the other. Since neither side was the real enemy, Sherlock had no way to kill them. He could only use transfiguration to delay the battle and try to find a gap to stop this meaningless battle. Unfortunately, both Tony and Thor were experienced warriors who would not give Sherlock any chance or time. The final result was that the more the three people fought, the angrier they became. The angrier they became, the darker they attacked, and the darker they attacked, the angrier they became. This wave was a dead cycle. When the captain ran to the battlefield of the three with his shield, the three were almost brain dead from the beating. The captain looked at the three people who were almost brain dead from the beating. The one hanging in the air like a demon was Tony. The captain knew, so who was the pervert dancing weirdly, and the guy holding the small wooden stick. Chapter 94, not a very pleasant meeting 3. Seeing the three people's attacks getting more and more ruthless, and the fighting postures and forms gradually deviated from the scope of normal people, the experienced captain knew that he couldn't let the three people continue like this. So, without any hesitation, he threw the shield and rushed into the battle of the three people. Among the three people, only Tony was a little rational. His smart brain discovered the captain's existence the moment the captain broke into the battle and did not stop the captain. But unfortunately, the two people on the other side did not have such a fresh brain as Tony, especially Sherlock, who was already overwhelmed at this time. The feeling of being aggrieved was like a kitten tickling Sherlock's heart. When he looked up, he saw the captain's vibranium shield flying towards him. Sherlock didn't dare to hesitate. Relying on the equipment made of the destroyer armor on his body, Sherlock kicked the flying shield with great force and kicked the shield back to the original path. Even with his good fighting quality, he immediately threw a softening spell on the vibranium shield. Damn it, let's see how you can swing your shield around. But what Sherlock didn't know was that vibranium is vibranium after all. It has the property of absorbing energy. Although it can't completely defend Sherlock's spell, it can still offset a small part. So the result is that, although the captain's shield is not as soft as a freshly baked pancake as Sherlock expected, it has become almost as soft as paper. But it is obvious that the captain doesn't know the power of Sherlock's magic. In the captain's opinion, his shield can withstand any energy attack. Therefore, the captain didn't care about the spell that looked like an energy attack. He still raised his arm on the original trajectory of the shield and waited for the shield to return. But this time, the captain's calculations obviously failed. The round shield seemed to be made of layers of paper. Although it was not like a pancake, it was not much different from the softness of a thin book. The result of this softness is that the round shield should have stopped at the place where it was fixed on the captain's arm, but under the effect of convention, it hit the captain's arm for a circle, and then hit the captain's face directly. At that moment, not to mention the captain, even Tony and Sherlock were confused. The captain took the shield from his face and began to observe it with a look of doubt on his life. Sherlock could even see the big question mark on the top of the captain's head. However, Thor on the other side did not give the captain a chance. Seeing another unfamiliar person joining the battle, although he didn't know which side he was from, it was definitely not his side. Although his head was almost filled with muscles, Thor still knew the saying that it was better to strike first. While everyone was stunned because the captain himself was hit in the face by the shield, Thor flew his Meow hammer towards the captain. Be careful. Out of teammate friendship, Tony reminded the captain as soon as he found Thor's action. After hearing Tony's reminder, the captain raised the shield directly with strong muscle memory. Unexpectedly, although the shield was as soft as a thin book, the energy absorbing property of vibranium did not disappear. The captain actually took on Thor's attack with a soft shield in his hand. Seeing Thor's attack, Tony on the other side no longer hesitated and began to continue his fight and educate his good nephew. Seeing that Tony started to fight, Sherlock and Thor naturally couldn't be idle. Of course, they needed to fight back. The three of them wrestled together again as they did at the beginning. Captain Liberty stared at his shield in a daze and then looked at the three people who were about to beat their brains out. The captain, who always had a good temper, felt for the first time that he had a fire in his heart that he couldn't vent, and even mixed with a little grievance. He viciously rolled the shield in his hand into a stick like a book, and the captain grinned and joined the battle with a newly made vibranium baseball bat. Little bastards, feel a little shock and education from the last century. Let me show you my long-dormant dream of the Super Bowl All-Star Game. Steve Rogers. Watch me, Steve Rogers, strike with all my strength. On the other side, Black Widow, who was still on the plane, looked through the plane at the three boys and a guy who looked like a boy, who were beaten to a pulp. She sighed helplessly. What was going on? She didn't care about Loki and the cage. After finding a place to land the plane, Black Widow checked her equipment and quickly rushed towards the four people. She was going to stop this inexplicable battle. But what Black Widow didn't expect was that she had just walked out of the woods and a small glass bottle came towards her. Black Widow didn't even have time to react when she was hit on the head by the glass bottle, and the liquid inside also poured all over Black Widow. As for what was inside, Sherlock could only say that Black Widow's luck was too bad. This thing was originally taken out by Sherlock to use on Thor or Tony, and was called Fun Water by Sherlock. In fact, it is a useless potion with no effect or extremely weak effect. Since Sherlock saw the effect of not 24 hours on Tony, he has been studying how to keep the interesting buff and shorten the duration as much as possible when he is free. Don't say it, Sherlock really figured it out. This Fun Water is the result of Sherlock's research. The effective time is only 2.5 hours, and there is no potion effect at all. It exists purely for fun. Sherlock originally wanted to throw this thing on the top of Tony or Thor's head as revenge, but it was hit away by the captain's shield stick, and it fell on Black Widow's head. Black Widow, who was drenched in pain by the unknown liquid before the fight started, was furious in an instant. Unable to bear it anymore, she roared directly. Stop fighting, stop it. Black Widow didn't feel something was wrong until she finished shouting. Why was her voice so rough? And her height didn't seem right. Why did she look so short when looking at those four people? In great doubt, Black Widow looked down at her body. It didn't matter what she saw, Black Widow was directly stunned. She had indeed become taller and also became extremely strong. However, this gender seemed to be a little wrong. The invisible foot peak was gone. Instead, in an indescribable position, there was a huge indescribable thing looming in the torn clothes because of her taller and stronger body. Oh. Black Widow finally couldn't help but let out an exclamation. Similarly, the four people on the other side who were frightened by Black Widow's roar also noticed Black Widow. Unlike the confused Black Widow, the four of them noticed the whole process of Black Widow's transformation, especially the huge indescribable thing that was looming. At that moment, everyone made a sound. Oh my god. What the hell? Don't eat the sour radish. Chapter 95. Rest in the aerospace carrier. In a conference room in the aerospace carrier, Captain, Tony, Sherlock, and Thor were silently doing their own things at different places in front of the conference table. Captain was rubbing his somewhat black cheek. It should be noted that this injury had nothing to do with the other people present. The culprit was the shield that Captain had placed on the table at this moment and had returned to normal. If someone had to take the blame, then Sherlock would be the only one left. The reason was very simple. After Sherlock and others' melee was stopped by the macho version of Black Widow, Sherlock restored Captain's shield as soon as possible out of kindness. But maybe Captain was still immersed in Black Widow's body shape, which was not much different from Hulk, and did not react. The shield that was originally rolled into a baseball bat bounced up like a spring under Sherlock's spell. This bounce didn't matter. Captain subconsciously dodged back, and the edge of the shield hit Captain's face. In fact, if he didn't dodge, the helmet on Captain's head could still resist. In this way, the Captain was hit hard by his round shield, which he had used for many years. The Captain was so angry that he almost let Sherlock feel the power of vibranium again. Fortunately, Black Widow successfully stopped the Captain's next move with her extraordinary figure and eyes that were more vicious than those of a murderer. This is why the Captain was rubbing his slightly blue cheek in the conference room at this moment. Iron Man Tony, who was sitting not far from the Captain, was not much better. He was hung upside down for a long time, so that Tony's eyes were red until now, as if he had awakened the Sharingan. Not only that, it might be because his head had touched the ground too many times. Even with the protection of the helmet, Tony still felt a little nauseous and dizzy at this time. He was rubbing his temples with his hands not far from the Captain, and from time to time he glared fiercely at Sherlock, who was sitting far away. That look, Sherlock was sure that, if the eyes could be lethal, although he would not die on the spot, it would be normal to lose half his life. As for Thor, his style is quite unique. Thor, who is far away from everyone, keeps his eyes on his Mjolnir hammer that Sherlock has changed the skin of. Maybe it is because Asgard rarely has bright colors like pink. Thor does not seem to reject that his clothes have been changed to pink by Sherlock, and even feels a little surprised. As for the Mjolnir head on his clothes and hammer, Thor does not seem to reject it at all, and even likes it very much after observing it carefully for a while. The reason is also very simple. The patterns are all generated directly by Sherlock using transfiguration. Although they are cute Hello Kitty cat heads, each cat head has its own expression, and there are also some characteristics of Thor, such as discharge. Although Thor is a warrior of Asgard and a rough man among rough men, no one can resist that this guy has a middle school girl's heart at his age. The more he looks at this limited edition skin on him, the more he likes it. Even now, Thor has already stood up and posed in various middle school poses without paying attention to others. In order to avenge himself for almost getting hit by the Mjolnir hammer, Sherlock did not actively let Thor use such skin-changing transformation. He even turned on the recording function of his helmet and started filming Thor's middle school syndrome. I dare not say anything else. Sherlock felt that, when Thor was normal, this thing would definitely be a black history. Not to mention threatening Thor, but at least he could get a few treasures from the Asgard treasury from Thor. Among the 4 people present, only Sherlock himself was exactly the same as when he came, and even the suit made from the destroyer armor on his body did not have a single wrinkle. After a while, Black Widow, who went to change clothes, walked into the conference room with Black Egg and Dr. Banner. Sherlock clearly saw that the corners of Black Egg and Dr. Banner's eyes were twitching, as if they had seen something unclean. The macho version of Black Widow walking in front of Heli Ludan is the most eye-catching one. Her sturdy figure looks exactly like the macho fan Ryujiro in the comics Sherlock read in his previous life. Even because of her tall and mighty figure, she couldn't find clothes of the right size after searching the entire aerospace mothership, and finally came to the meeting room wearing a pair of large shorts and a vest. However, according to Sherlock's observation, Black Widow does not seem to reject her macho image, and even likes it a little, with a faint smile on her lips. God knows that Black Widow had a sudden whim to experience the joy of peeing while standing when she was changing clothes, and even liked her current body a little. Not to mention that under the blessing of this body, Black Widow's softness has not changed, but her relative strength has turned more than one level. In terms of emotion and reason, Black Widow has no reason to refuse such a strong body. What's more, with her original identity as a woman and her strong body, Black Widow is even confident that she can be a bridegroom every day and change brides every day, making Tony, the playboy, bow down. It can be said that except for the fact that she can't find suitable clothes at present, Black Widow is very satisfied with this adventure, especially the fact that she can pee while standing. In this way, under the gaze of everyone, Black Widow calmly walked to the side of the conference table, pulled her chair and sat down. But even after sitting down, everyone's eyes were still on Black Widow, and they didn't move away at all. Even everyone present looked at Black Widow with an expression like an old man in the subway. As for the reason, it is also very simple. Can you imagine a woman like Fan Myung-jero sitting not far from you, and then she gathered her hair very femininely, and then propped up her chin, and looked at everyone very charmingly? Sherlock doesn't know about others, but for Sherlock himself, this picture is really hot. Especially after looking at the entry on the top of Black Widow's head, Sherlock felt even more hot. Entry, peerless macho, disabled. Entry effect, once the entry is uploaded, any creature will be transformed into a peerless macho, with the strongest body on the surface of the earth and the same combat power. For details, please refer to Han Myung-jero. Note, due to the ineffectiveness of the drug effect, the entry effect and time are greatly weakened, and the owner loses most of Han Myung-jero's combat consciousness and strength, only retaining the body shape. Entry time: 1 hour, 50 minutes and 0 seconds MMP. Sherlock wants to curse every time he sees this entry. When he was experimenting with this fun water, such an entry never appeared once, and most of them were even some spoof effects. Looking at the eye-catching Black Widow, Sherlock said that he was not envious. That would be a lie. After all, which man can resist the temptation of ghost back? The only thing that made Sherlock feel defensive was that he had never encountered such an entry. Is he really unlucky? Sherlock fell into deep self-doubt for a while. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96: Meeting on the Helicarrier. Although everyone's eyes were focused on Black Widow herself didn't seem to care at all, and even looked at the people sitting in the conference room with a good feeling. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like this? In response to Black Widow's question, everyone twitched their mouths and shook their heads slowly to indicate that they were fine. Sherlock even saw Dr. Banner, who was following Black Egg, hurriedly looked at his watch used to calculate heart rate. Black Egg almost couldn't help but want to tell Black Widow to be a man and not to make a woman's chirp. Fortunately, the words were on the tip of his tongue, but he finally held them back with strong willpower. Sherlock's eyelids jumped. If he remembered correctly, he and the Hulk still had a little grudge, and Sherlock didn't want to experience the same backfall as Loki. Fortunately, Dr. Banner still controlled his emotions very well. Seeing that everyone was fine, Black Egg, who had just put Loki in the special prison, began to talk about what happened next. But it is obvious that the Avengers have not reached a consensus on how to deal with Loki. The most critical one is Thor. Thor, who has a middle school syndrome, stood up and asked Helluland to return Loki. The reason is also very strong. As a person from Asgard, his brother, the child of the god King Odin, the Earth has no right to judge Loki, and he asked to bring Loki back to Asgard for trial. In response to Thor's request, Helluland just calmly said that, since Loki came to Earth, he has killed no less than 8 people so far, and this does not count the number of deaths caused indirectly. When Thor heard this, the corner of his mouth twitched, and he immediately said that Loki was adopted, and decisively cut off the relationship. But the pink and Hello Kitty outfit on his body made Thor feel more like a pervert than a prince at this moment. Not surprisingly, everyone in the Avengers has their own ideas, and these people also quarreled. Sherlock has no interest in these people's arguing. If he was not wearing a mask at this moment, Sherlock even wanted to take out some snacks and drinks to eat while watching them arguing. The Avengers live performance. Sherlock, as a fun-loving person, has no reason to refuse, right? Although Sherlock wants to be a quiet handsome man and quietly watch the people present pretending to be cool, it is a pity that Harry Luden will not give Sherlock too many opportunities. Seeing that the scene is getting more and more chaotic, if it continues like this, the entire Avengers will probably break up in the next second, let alone form. Harry Luden decisively began to divert attention. Quiet, ladies and gentlemen, quiet. Since we can't reach an agreement now, let's solve the current problem first. What do you think, Mr. Sherlock, the magical magician sitting over there? Hearing that, Harry Luden shifted everyone's attention to Sherlock and tried to use words to figure out Sherlock's identity under the vest. Tony, who is a smart man, flashed a hint of worry in his eyes and followed the big group to shift his attention to Sherlock. Faced with Harry Luden's sudden difficulty, Sherlock felt like he was eating a melon and suddenly ate it on himself. But faced with such a situation, Sherlock said he was not panicked at all. Sherlock, who had read so many novels and watched so many TV shows in his previous life, said that he was really going to let go. He could not fool the black brined egg, even if the black brined egg was completely purged. After sorting out his thoughts, Sherlock answered very calmly, "I'm sorry, the black bald man. I'm not the little guy Sherlock. Although I admit that most of the potions I use come from that interesting little guy. It's a pity that I'm not that little guy. Secondly, I don't think you need to focus on me. As for your conflicts, I have seen too many of them in my long life. I only care about the crisis that the pink perverted brother over there may cause on the earth. That's all. In other words, I'm not your enemy. I think the little guy next to you who likes to hide in the tin can prove this. Finally, I'm not some magical magician. If you can call me a wizard." Sherlock's voice was changed by the mask into a strong electronic sound effect without any personal color, and people couldn't feel Sherlock's identity and emotions. But Sherlock's words successfully made Tony feel his blood pressure rise. Little guy? It was a rebellion. Tony swore that after this matter was over, he would definitely let Sherlock experience the strong friendship of his elders from his little guy. Thor also had his blood pressure rise. He really liked this set of pink cat skin, but just when he was about to get angry, he was held down by Black Widow with a palm as big as a palm fan. But now, Tony did not interrupt Sherlock's current pretense, but just stared at Sherlock silently. On the other side, Black Braised Egg was not in such a good mood, and even felt that the guy opposite was Sherlock. After all, a black braised egg and a black bald head, the two can be said to be of the same lineage. But it was obvious that at this moment, Black Braised Egg did not dare to offend the mysterious wizard in front of him too much. After all, according to the content of his words, this guy should be very old. An old monster, no matter what, is always on his side. Just this point is enough for Harry Luden to temporarily put aside his suspicion of the mysterious man in front of him. Of course, Harry Luden is not a fool. The familiarity of Tony shown by the mysterious man in front of him made Harry Luden feel surprised, so he turned his eyes to Tony, who was sitting not far away, as if asking about the authenticity of the words of this mysterious man. What can Tony do? Although Sherlock is not boasting, he is his nephew after all. After glaring at Sherlock with a vicious look and being ignored by Sherlock, Tony nodded to Harry Luden. Seeing that Tony was a guarantee, Harry Luden temporarily put down his guard against Sherlock and announced that the meeting would be postponed. He needed to interrogate Loki's purpose of coming to the Earth. When everyone heard it, they didn't mean to continue arguing, and they all dispersed with their own thoughts. However, when it was Sherlock's turn, Sherlock was stopped by Black Widow and Harry Luden. The two put a bracelet on Sherlock, saying it was convenient to contact Sherlock and to locate Sherlock on the spaceship. Sherlock had no objection to this and wore the bracelet obediently. After all, Sherlock didn't need to make himself uncomfortable at this time, because a unlocking spell could solve the problem. Chapter 97 Battle on the Helicarrier. After putting on the bracelet, Sherlock left the meeting room on his own. Sherlock didn't care where other people went. At this time, Sherlock just wanted to take a good look at the largest flying equipment in human history. After all, apart from some interstellar movies, this aerospace carrier of S.H.I.E.L.D. can be said to be the largest flying equipment in human history, and it can even be used for both sea and space. It was the first time for Sherlock to step into such a huge equipment in his two lives, so of course he had to take a good look. You really don't say. The space inside is really large. Sherlock even got lost several times along the way, and he had to ask people for a long time before he could continue to visit. Along the way, Sherlock didn't miss any of the weapons depot, control center, engine room, and hangar, and even went up to the deck to feel the feeling of being in the sky. Of course, Sherlock also saw some familiar technologies, the most typical of which was the power source of this battleship. That guy, the huge reactor, was even bigger than the one in Stark Industrial Park. Not only that, Sherlock also found a lot of things with the logo of Stark Industries, which made Sherlock sweat. It turns out that Stark Industries no longer manufactures weapons, but has become a technical support for manufacturing weapons. Sherlock admired this point. He was indeed a capitalist who played with flowers. Of course, in addition to these, Sherlock also found some familiar people on the aerospace carrier, such as Agent May in the American TV series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the two male and female scientists who were just pendants in the early stage and were awesome in the later stage. It seems that they were called Fitz and Simmons or something. Sherlock said that he had forgotten a little. Of course, Sherlock did not go to these people to chat. Maybe Sherlock could only see these guys once in his life. The only person Sherlock said a few words was Agent May. It must be said that this very capable female agent is still a good person. When Sherlock asked for directions, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent showed Sherlock the way very enthusiastically. If you want to say that the most regrettable thing for Sherlock during the whole visit is probably the visit to the cafeteria, it has to be said that the food on this aerospace carrier is really good, but unfortunately, in order not to give Henry Ludan any chance to find out his identity, Sherlock endured it and didn't even drink a sip of water. What Sherlock didn't know was that while he was leisurely strolling in the aerospace carrier in another conference room, the first generation of Avengers had already quarreled with Henry Ludan. The most important thing was Captain and Thor. The two were dissatisfied with Henry Ludan's behavior of taking the cosmic cube to study weapons privately, and Henry Ludan also said very strongly that when Thor first came to Earth and destroyed a town, he already knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. needed more powerful weapons. Fortunately, Black Widow had returned to her original appearance at this time, which made the quarrel look a bit serious. Otherwise, Black Widow's sissy appearance would really make the quarrel seem not so serious. In fact, it's not surprising that these people held a small meeting behind Sherlock's back. After all, Sherlock appeared suddenly, and except for Tony, no one dared to trust Sherlock, who hadn't even revealed his face until now. But Sherlock didn't care even if he knew. Instead of watching men whose combined ages were almost over 1,000 years old quarreling, it would be better to take a look at this aerospace creation that can be said to be the largest in human history. While everyone was arguing, Sherlock was strolling leisurely in the aerospace carrier. Not far from the aerospace carrier, a S.H.I.E.L.D. plane quietly approached the aerospace carrier. It was the S.H.I.E.L.D. people and Hawkeye who were controlled. Just like in the movie, Hawkeye ushered in the highlight of his career. He shot a propeller of the aerospace carrier with an arrow. In an instant, the huge vibration made the people in the aerospace carrier twisted and turned, including Sherlock. Even if Sherlock was stupid, he knew that the attack in the movie was coming. Without any hesitation, Sherlock took out his magic wand and started to rush towards the propeller. He didn't want to experience what it was like to fall freely at such a high place. Just as Sherlock was running around in the cabin like a headless fly, someone grabbed Sherlock's arm. When Sherlock was about to reach back and cast a spell on this ignorant guy, he realized that the person who grabbed him was Tony. "Follow me." Tony pulled Sherlock in one direction without hesitation, and in a flash he came to a wall. After taking out his mobile phone and fiddling with it for a while, a battle armor with an unknown number appeared in front of the two of them. Sherlock's eyebrows jumped. "Good guy, you are not pretending anymore, right? You Stark must have left a back door, otherwise you can control the S.H.I.E.L.D's helicarrier with your mobile phone." Tony didn't explain too much. This battle armor was the one Sherlock used to fight with other Avengers when he came. Tony quickly put on the equipment, and Sherlock didn't hesitate to put on a recovery armor on Tony. Seeing that he had recovered to a brand new battle armor, Tony didn't continue to struggle and gave orders to Sherlock directly. Smelly boy, the aerospace carrier was attacked. If nothing unexpected happens, it must be the trick left by the guy who was caught. I will locate the damaged parts and transmit the location to your helmet. I need you to repair the damaged parts. Can you do it? Sherlock did not refuse Tony's order. As long as he was not allowed to face the green fat man directly, Sherlock would accept anything. He saluted in a weird way. Yes sir. Seeing Sherlock's funny look, Tony rolled his eyes in annoyance. Knowing that Sherlock's magic was powerful, Tony was not worried that Sherlock would encounter other people. After telling him to be careful, he flew out to the corridor. After Tony left, Sherlock had no tasks for a moment. After thinking about it, Sherlock decided to reinforce Loki's cage. Let's see if it was Thor who fell to the ground, if Loki couldn't get out. Sherlock could even imagine the collapsed expression of Loki who experienced free fall and couldn't get out. Thinking of this, Sherlock did what he said, and relying on his memory of shopping just now, he quickly ran towards the place where Loki was imprisoned. However, Sherlock forgot one thing, that is, the place where Loki was imprisoned was at the bottom of the cabin, and according to the original book, the green fat man who was stimulated to transform was also wreaking havoc at the bottom of the cabin at this moment. Chapter 98. The green fat smiles and life and death are unpredictable. Sherlock ran towards Loki happily and almost completely forgot about the existence of the green fat man. His mind was full of going to see Loki and playing a prank in front of the god of mischief. After all, before crossing over, Sherlock had a good impression of the actor of Loki, Tom Hiddleston. Although Tom Hiddleston is not here now, there is a Loki who looks exactly the same, at least on TV, which is not unacceptable. After all, who can refuse to play a prank on an actor they like? If it were possible, there wouldn't be so many conspicuous bags among the fans of those stars. Of course, it is not ruled out that the star himself is a conspicuous bag, such as Leo Zoo. Sherlock was laughing and talking all the way, without any worry, but according to Murphy's law, the more you fear something, the more likely you are to encounter it. For example, Iron Man is most afraid of Sherlock encountering the green fat man. Sherlock, who was happily rushing on his way, felt a palpitation for no reason, and the more he walked forward, the more palpitations he felt. For a moment, Sherlock felt a little confused. Although Sherlock had studied magic for 7 years, and even read the special notes of the Great Master, in fact, Sherlock had not read any books on prophecy for 7 years. He had not even read a single word. The reason was very simple. Sherlock and Hermione had the same opinion. Divination and prophecy were purely a talent. Sherlock only admitted that he had no talent for prophecy. Otherwise, he would not have been unable to draw SSR and could not get out of Africa. Because of this, Sherlock skipped the prophecy class in his entire magic learning career. In Sherlock's opinion, wouldn't it be better to practice more spells in that time? Sherlock had learned a little bit of prophecy courses, and even if he read the introduction, he should know that he should not continue to move forward at the moment when the feeling of palpitations appeared. Unfortunately, Sherlock didn't know, so Sherlock was still very stubborn and continued to move forward with such a bad feeling. Why is it that good intentions can hardly save a doomed ghost? Not long after Sherlock walked forward, a tooth-grinding sound of metal tearing suddenly came from the ceiling not far away. Before Sherlock could react, the ceiling not far away was smashed through by a green object with a sound of metal tearing. At this moment, Sherlock stood there like a wooden chicken. It was not right to leave or not to leave, because Sherlock was too familiar with the thing in the smoke and dust, the green fat man. A living green fat man. Watching the green fat man slowly stand up from the smoke and dust, Sherlock showed a smile that was uglier than crying. He felt more and more that he should find a temple to pray and change his luck recently. Then again, is there a temple here in the lighthouse country? Watching the green fat man slowly stand up and start to observe the surrounding environment with his small eyes, Sherlock could only hope that the green fat man would ignore it or forget the past grudge. But unfortunately, Sherlock's little plan did not succeed. The green fat man was framed by a red-haired villain and smashed through countless layers. When he turned around, he saw a familiar face. Not only familiar, but also a little bit of a grudge. At this moment, the green fat man smiled crookedly. The red-haired villain was too smart and the green fat man hated it, but this villain who didn't look very smart, the green fat man felt that he could still give it a try. The green fat man was happy here, and Sherlock was about to cry over there. Especially after the green fat man showed him that crooked smile. Sherlock felt his anus tightened, and inexplicably appeared in his mind the picture of the green fat man smiling, and the black wife being startled, that netizens posted after the release of Avengers 2. Seeing the green fat man showing the same smile to him, and then striding towards him, Sherlock's face under the mask almost became Bujingayan, with the expression of "don't come over here" all over his face. At this moment, Sherlock threw out almost all the isolation and blocking spells he knew. Even under the threat of chrysanthemum, Sherlock broke through his limit and threw out nearly 7 spells in 1 second. But unfortunately, these spells only blocked the green fat man's footsteps for less than a second. At that moment, Sherlock suddenly understood how the Hogwarts trio felt when facing the giant monster. Why is this guy's magic resistance so high? Didn't we say that I'm a rule-based person? What Sherlock didn't know was that the reason why the green fat man could ignore Sherlock's spells was not because of magic resistance, but purely because of his thick skin and the emphasis on breaking all laws with one force. Seeing that the green fat man began to change from walking slowly to charging, Sherlock transformed into Bujingayan and shouted loudly, "Don't come over here," while taking out all his strength to run wildly. At this moment, Sherlock understood the feelings of those little girls who were chased by the strange uncle. After all, anyone who saw a devil muscle man with a head as big as a wheel chasing him would have the same understanding. While running, he kept using transfiguration to change the terrain to try to stop the green fat man. On the other hand, he kept searching in his library like the Riemann to see if there was anything that could solve his current predicament. At the same time, he kept thanking Dumbledore's notes for the superb transfiguration. If it weren't for the existence of transfiguration, Sherlock's ashes would probably have been thrown away by the green fat man. As for the coordinates sent by Tony in the helmet at this time, Sherlock didn't even take a look at it. How could he have the time to look at it? In great fear, Sherlock had completely forgotten that he still had the 2 magics of portal and apparition to escape. After a lot of hard searching, Sherlock sadly found that he had nothing to deal with the violent green fat man. At that moment, Sherlock regretted why he always stared at the potion and forgot the magical props in Harry Potter. Now even a flying broom could help him run faster. After a long time, Sherlock finally made up his mind. The only thing that could help him solve the dilemma was the water of fun in his hand. He just bet that the water of fun could get a negative buff on the green disc and help him out of danger. Do it when you think of it. Without any hesitation, Sherlock found a suitable opportunity to throw the water of fun in his hand at the green fat man behind him. Don't say it was thrown quite accurately, and it hit the green fat man's head that was bigger than a wheel. But the next second Sherlock's expression under the mask began to become distorted. After this incident, I must find a temple to worship. Absolutely! Exclamation mark. Chapter 99 Zaya, it's me. Wait a minute. Sozo you. The reason why Sherlock's face was so distorted was also very simple. Simply because he saw the effect of his own water. Entry, Wing Chun, Ip Man entry effect. Inherit all the skills of Master Ip in all directions, without dead ends. You are the second Master Ip. Even if Master Ip comes back to life, he will be the same as you. Entry time: 2 hours, 29 minutes and 0 seconds. Note, due to the ineffectiveness of the drug effect, the entry effect and time are greatly weakened, but because of his own physical fitness far exceeding Master Ip, most of the weakening is offset, even far exceeding the normal entry effect. On the other side, the green fat man, in fact, originally didn't want to beat Sherlock. After all, although the green fat man is simple, he is not stupid. Although his IQ is relatively low, he can understand basic things. To put it bluntly, the last time he inserted himself into Sherlock's attack route, so even if his pants were cut a big hole, Green was afraid that he didn't really blame Sherlock. At most, because he was in the public eye, the green fat man felt that he must find some place to get back. This time, he just wanted to scare Sherlock and give him a warning. Moreover, this villain could perform some magical spells, and the green fat man felt that it was really fun, even though these spells were to prevent him from approaching this villain. But this villain had no martial ethics. He was having fun, and suddenly threw a bottle of water and smashed it on his head. This made the green fat man, who had always had an evil smile on his face, change his face. This time, the green fat man was really a little angry. The evil smile on his face quickly turned into anger after being poured with water from the small bottle. But soon, the anger on the green fat man's millstone-sized face condensed. The reason was very simple. There were many more moves in his head inexplicably, which made the charging green fat man stop and close his eyes, as if he was feeling the extra memories in his head. The green fat man with abundant martial ethics almost instantly judged that, if he used the extra things in his head, he would definitely be able to take his attack power to a higher level. Seeing that the green fat man had stopped, Sherlock also stopped with a dead look on his face. He stopped running, fearing that he could not escape. He only hoped that when he fought with the green fat man later, the green fat man would not use his moves to beat him. At this time, Sherlock was planning how to write his tombstone, and hoped that his armor modified from the destroyer armor could withstand the destruction of the green fat man. On the other side, Tony, who was holding the aerospace mothership, felt that he could not hold on any longer. The coordinates had been shared for a long time, but he did not see Sherlock coming. Moreover, Sherlock did not reply to the message in the helmet. In anger, Tony directly ordered Jarvis to invade Sherlock's helmet. He wanted to see with his own eyes what Sherlock, the little bastard, was doing. However, what Tony did not expect was that when Jarvis invaded Sherlock's helmet and projected the face in Sherlock's helmet in front of Tony, what Tony saw was Sherlock's face bathed in holy light, as if Sherlock could ascend to heaven on the spot in the next second. If Tony didn't know what kind of behavior this kid has, he would have thought Sherlock had some kind of divine revelation. What the hell are you doing, little brat? Come here now. Don't look like you've seen God. If you could see God, you would have seen him a long time ago. Wizards can't go to heaven. Get over here now. Facing Tony's roar, Sherlock seemed to ignore it, still with an expression of holy light on his face, and even a tear slowly flowed from the corner of his eye. Dear Uncle Tony, Zaya, I'm afraid I'm screwed this time. Hearing Sherlock's irresponsible words, Tony was about to refute, but Sherlock's expression suddenly changed, and hope for life was shrouded in smoke in his eyes again. Before Tony could say anything, Sherlock shouted, "Contact me later, I can survive again." After saying that, he mercilessly cut off the connection of the helmet without giving Tony any chance to speak. The reason why Sherlock rekindled his hope for life was because of the weapon that suddenly appeared, the sound of the pink meow meow hammer that Sherlock was so familiar with. The pink meow meow hammer hit the head of the green fat man who was squinting his eyes and feeling the moves in his mind with a fierce attack, and then flew back to the hands of Thor, who had just arrived not far behind the green fat man. Just listening to the sound of the meow meow hammer hitting the green fat man's head made my teeth ache. The sound was so crisp and fresh, and it was a good start. Sherlock quickly erased all the words on the epitaph on the tombstone in his mind, and even erased his own name without mercy. And he wrote Thor's name on it without any hesitation, and even the epitaph was written in an instant. A friend who is always loyal and saves me from the water and fire. The little drama in Sherlock's mind was unknown to the green fat man standing opposite Sherlock and Thor standing behind the green fat man, but the green fat man knew that a more annoying guy was coming. After taking a deep look at Sherlock standing opposite him, the green fat man turned around and looked at Thor fiercely without any hesitation. Thor was also prepared for the green fat man to rush up, and even under the confidence of his powerful force, he did not forget to tell Sherlock to leave quickly. Listening to Thor's instructions, Sherlock burst into tears. He is worthy of being my friend of resentment. He is really, I cry to death. Then Sherlock silently drew a cross for Thor in his heart without any hesitation, and then decisively used the phantom to run away. Seeing Sherlock disappear on the spot, Thor no longer had any concerns, and began to fully guard against the green fat man's charge. After all, in Thor's view, the green fat man was just a silly man with a thicker skin and a longer blood bar. But what Thor didn't expect was that the green fat man didn't launch a ball charge at him as he imagined, but instead stretched out his hands one after another. One foot slowly moved forward, and the other foot supported the ground, and slowly squatted down, looking at the green fat man's weird posture. At that moment, Thor, who had never seen what martial arts was full of question marks. Was this guy played badly by the evil wizard, or what? What kind of unlucky posture is this? Why have I never seen this strange posture? Speaking of which, can this posture really be used in a fight? Although Thor has never seen it, anyone who has seen the Ip Man movie will say something authentic when seeing the green fat man's posture, and then add a sentence to the taciturn green fat man. Wing Chun, Ip Man. Chapter 100 The Fall of the Helicarrier. Sherlock followed the coordinates in the helmet, and moved forward quickly. After he left the battlefield between Hulk and Thor, Sherlock did not continue to apparition. The reason was very simple. Sherlock needed to repair the damage along the way. The aerospace carrier was a huge aircraft like an aircraft carrier. Every damage inside could cause this huge guy weighing tens of thousands of tons to fall from the sky. If it fell into the sea, it would be fine. If it fell into the city, that guy, not to mention how many people could be killed. Even if it simply killed some flowers, plants, cats, dogs, etc., it would have a great impact. As for the battle between Thor and Hulk on the other side, Sherlock could only say that he was powerless. He thought about the movie Ip Man, where Master Yi pressed the other person's head and made crazy small circles. Sherlock could only silently draw a cross for Thor in his heart, and prayed a few more times that he wished that the gods and Buddhas in the sky would bless Hulk as much as possible. After all, that was the green fat man. The difference between Master Yi's fist and the green fat man's fist was like the difference between an embroidery needle and a pile driver. I hope Thor can't experience the joy of a pile driver like fist. After rushing all the way, Sherlock finally arrived not far from the coordinates. The captain was also here at this time. Sherlock even heard Tony frantically calling the captain to pull a red lever outside. It was just a pity that the captain had no energy to deal with Tony at this time. The waves of agents who were confused by Loki rushed towards the captain like flies who saw Ali. Sherlock's arrival was naturally discovered by them. This group of people was like a death squad. In an instant, they split into a group and rushed towards Sherlock with fists and guns raised. Seeing this scene, Sherlock almost laughed. He saw that the green fat man was still a little anxious, but these ordinary people were completely in Sherlock's hands. As soon as the wand flashed, Sherlock wanted to show these stupid, bewitched muggles what magic is. But before Sherlock could wave the wand in his hand, the captain's shout came from not far away. Wizards, don't hurt them. They are all good people. They are just ordinary agents who have been bewitched. Just knock them out. Hearing the captain's request, Sherlock rolled his eyes helplessly. Are these bewitched guys all good people? Can Hydra be called good people? Killing them all may lead to false cases, but killing every other one will definitely make some fish slip through the net. But now the Hydra has not revealed its true form, and Sherlock can't really kill every other one in front of the captain. Helplessly, he could only give up the idea of using powerful magic, and instead use the combination of stunning spell and petrifying spell to start clearing the way. In such a small cabin, Sherlock's spells can be said to be invincible. The only thing that made Sherlock feel annoyed was that the person lying on the ground delayed his progress. After spending a lot of effort, Sherlock finally came to the captain's side. When he looked over, he saw a huge gap, which made Sherlock stunned for a moment. Is this aerospace carrier so fragile? It is hard to imagine how powerful the bomb of Hawkeye's arrow is. The gap in front of him does not look like it was blown out by Hawkeye at all, but rather like it was created by a mud truck. Listening to Tony's repeated calls in the teammate channel, Sherlock no longer hesitated and agreed to Tony, asking Tony to leave the propeller. Sherlock ignored the monsters rushing up around him and directly used a flying spell to pull the lever that Tony requested. With a tooth-grinding metallic sound, the propeller that had been parked for a long time finally began to rotate. But compared to the other three, this propeller did rotate, but because it was damaged, the lift it provided was really limited. Seeing this, Sherlock no longer hesitated. He shouted loudly and asked the captain to cover him. He also threw nearly 10 rounds of magic together with Tony, who was flying near the propeller, to restore it to its original state. Under Sherlock's magic, it was as if time was going backwards. The originally broken propeller began to slowly return to normal. Even Tony's armor, which had been damaged by the mixer many times, was restored to the most perfect state under Sherlock's magic. But after all, there were still countless things that were causing damage inside the aerospace mothership. Even if the propeller restored its lift, it would be difficult to maintain its altitude. At most, the speed of descent would slow down. Sherlock had no good way to deal with this. He called Tony to return to the interior of the battleship quickly. Sherlock needed to repair the damage on the hull quickly. Otherwise, let alone landing on the sea, once it fell, it would be a new century Titanic. Just as Tony was about to fly back, a green figure instantly smashed through the mothership's territory and shot towards the ground like a cannonball. Tony, who saw this scene, didn't even have time to rescue the green fat man who was flying down and could only shout out Dr. Banner's name. Sherlock, who didn't see this scene, didn't know what happened. After Tony's explanation, Sherlock knew that the green fat man had fallen down, and he could only smack his mouth in surprise. Thor is still very awesome. Damn, the green disc that Master Yi has added to his body can be hit down by Thor. It seems that Thor's resistance level needs to be simply improved. What Sherlock didn't know was that although it seemed that the green fat man was beaten and flew out by Thor, in fact, this was completely Thor's helpless move. He was able to do this entirely because of the credit of this Meow Hammer. The actual situation is that if Thor didn't do this, he would be completely pressed to the ground by the green fat man. Master Yi's same fast punch, green fat enlarged version. Thor experienced it more than once. If it weren't for Thor's good physique as an Asgardian, it is estimated that his ashes would have been given to Yang by the green fat man possessed by Master Yi. Even so, Thor's face now looks like a paint palette, colorful and funny. The captain may not know much about the green fat man, but both Sherlock and Tony know that the green fat man is not afraid of falling from such a high altitude, and they are not worried about the green fat man's safety. As soon as Tony flew into the gap, Sherlock immediately began to repair the big gap that seemed to be created by a mud truck, while the captain and Tony served as a cover. Several people were very anxious. After all, the gap that the green fat man had just smashed was still waiting for Sherlock to repair. It was impossible for the aerospace mothership to really be flooded when it really fell. Just as several people were busy repairing the gap, the entire aerospace mothership trembled slightly, and then a burst of alarms rang throughout the aerospace mothership. Tony's face changed the moment he heard this sound. The captain and Sherlock didn't understand, but Tony, as a technology provider, knew this sound very well. This sound meant that the prisoners had the possibility of escaping from prison, and the detention room automatically opened the defense, separated from the mothership, and began to fall down. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.